You're living only half of your life. Every day you wear a mask, hiding your true self not only from others, but from yourself. What if I told you there's an entire universe of archetypes and complexes inside you that control your decisions? Carl Jung discovered that we are prisoners of our own unconscious. In midlife, many face a crisis. You have success, but no meaning. Why? Because you never met your real self. Today, I'll tell you how one theory can completely transform your understanding of yourself and others. How to integrate your shadow, find yourself, and start living an authentic life. Ready to discover who you really are? Then watch until the end. Your psyche will thank you. This knowledge will turn your world upside down. This video contains all of Carl Jung's psychology, so get comfortable and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Part 1. The persona. The persona refers to the outward identity or social mask that people adopt to navigate the demands of society and professional life. Carl Jung borrowed this term from the theatrical masks used in ancient Greek drama, highlighting that the persona plays a necessary and constructive role rather than being mere pretense or insincerity. People naturally create and adopt multiple personas tailored to various roles they play, such as parent, colleague, friend, or community member. The capacity to shift between these social identities and adjust behavior based on the situation is a vital interpersonal skill. However, difficulties can occur when individuals overly merge with these personas, or when there is a stark disconnect between their outward image and inner reality. The shaping of the persona starts early in life, as children begin to adjust their behavior to meet the expectations of family and society. They quickly learn that some traits are praised while others lead to criticism or rejection. This dynamic encourages children to highlight the parts of themselves that earn approval and conceal those that do not. As individuals progress through educational institutions and into the workforce, their personas are further molded. These environments tend to reward specific abilities, mindsets, and behavior while discouraging or suppressing others. Over time, people may become so adept at projecting an idealized version of themselves that they begin to lose contact with their genuine emotions, desires, and natural impulses. Jung noted that genuine persona development hinges on achieving a delicate balance between adapting to society and remaining true to oneself. A healthy persona allows individuals to fulfill necessary social and occupational roles without erasing their individuality or personal authenticity. Yet, when the persona becomes too rigid, overdeveloped, or entrenched, it can turn into a psychological trap. Instead of fostering connection and self-understanding, it can obstruct them. People may find themselves drained by the effort required to uphold their public image, or they may grow increasingly alienated from their inner life as they chase approval and external validation. Midlife often marks a turning point where previously effective personas begin to break down. Individuals might realize that their accomplishments, though socially celebrated, have failed to bring lasting fulfillment. Successful professionals may experience a sense of emptiness despite accolades, while devoted caregivers might struggle with identity loss when their children no longer rely on them. Although these disruptions can be deeply unsettling, they also open the door to more authentic modes of living. Jung regarded such crises not merely as psychological setbacks, but as vital opportunities for inner growth. They invite individuals to rediscover neglected aspects of the self that were sacrificed in pursuit of external success. A key component of mature persona development is the ability to remain aware of the distinction between the roles one performs and the deeper self that exists beneath them. To thrive psychologically, individuals must be capable of donning and shedding their various personas fluidly, without becoming overly fused with any particular identity or role. This flexibility relies on what Jung termed ego strength, the inner resilience to stay grounded in one's core identity even as external pressures shift and social roles evolve. When the persona is aligned with and serves the authentic self, rather than substituting for it, people are able to participate meaningfully in the world while staying rooted in their own sense of purpose and personal truth. Part 2. Parental Archetypes. Parental archetypes represent foundational patterns of nurturing, authority, and guidance that influence human development from infancy through adulthood. Carl Jung identified within the unconscious mind of every individual a universal image of both a great mother and a great father. Symbolic figures that go far beyond one's personal experience with real-life parents. These archetypal figures shape our understanding of care, discipline, protection, and leadership throughout life. They influence not only the parent-child dynamic, but also our interactions with mentors, teachers, employers, and spiritual authorities. Recognizing these archetypes provides insight into why certain authority figures can provoke intense emotional responses, and why parenting struggles often stir deep, unconscious conflicts. The Great Mother archetype embodies the dual nature of maternal energy, both its nurturing and its destructive sides. In her benevolent form, she symbolizes boundless love, emotional support, creative fertility, and a profound connection to nature's rhythms and intuitive wisdom. She fosters a sense of emotional safety, encourages exploration and personal growth, and offers solace during periods of stress or change. Yet, this archetype also contains a shadow side. When distorted, the Great Mother becomes overbearing, suffocating, and ultimately inhibiting, reflecting a tendency to overprotect, stifle independence, and hinder the natural progression toward autonomy and adulthood. The Great Father archetype, on the other hand, represents both protective strength and authoritative discipline. In his positive expression, he stands for moral integrity, guidance, stability, and the capacity to offer structure and purpose. This father figure instills self-confidence, teaches essential life skills, and serves as a model for navigating social systems and cultural norms. However, the archetypal father also has a negative aspect. When misaligned, he can manifest as domineering, harshly judgmental, and rigidly authoritarian, using fear and punishment to enforce obedience instead of fostering growth through love and understanding. According to Jung, when actual parents fail to embody the positive dimensions of these archetypes, or when they overly identify with their negative expressions, individuals may develop what he termed parental complexes. A maternal complex may leave someone emotionally dependent, unable to take responsibility for themselves, and constantly seeking substitute mother figures for comfort and protection. A paternal complex, by contrast, can surface either as defiant resistance to all forms of authority or as excessive submission that stifles personal strength and independent thought. These unconscious patterns often persist into adulthood, subtly influencing personal relationships, professional paths, and major life decisions. They remain active forces until brought into conscious awareness and worked through in psychological development. Jung proposed that healing involves cultivating what he called the inner parent, the internal ability to offer oneself the care, support, structure, and guidance that may have been absent in early life. This means drawing on the constructive qualities of both the maternal and paternal archetypes, regardless of gender, to create a stable internal foundation of wisdom and support. As individuals strengthen this inner parental function, They become capable of offering genuine care and guidance to others without falling into patterns of control or dependency. Likewise, they learn to accept support from others without sacrificing their autonomy. This process of psychological integration enables people to break harmful family legacies and form healthier, more conscious relationships, both with their own children and with the younger generation at large. Part 3. The Hero's Journey and the Child Archetype. The hero archetype stands as one of the most profound and universally resonant models for understanding human transformation and the path to psychological growth. Carl Jung observed that hero myths across diverse cultures exhibit strikingly similar structures, indicating that they originate from innate, archetypal patterns rooted in the collective unconscious rather than being solely passed down through cultural narratives. The classic hero's journey unfolds as a departure from the known world, followed by encounters with perilous trials, guidance from wise figures, and ultimately a return, transformed, bringing newfound wisdom or abilities that enrich the broader community. This symbolic structure offers a powerful psychological framework for individuation, helping people interpret their internal struggles as part of a deeper pursuit of selfhood and personal evolution. The journey of the psyche typically starts with what Jung termed the call to adventure, a rupture in the routine of everyday life that prompts a person to face new trials and move beyond the confines of familiar yet limiting circumstances. This call may emerge from external disruptions, such as losing a job, experiencing a health crisis, or undergoing relationship turmoil, or it may arise from an internal sense of dissatisfaction and yearning for change. Initially, this summons is often met with resistance. Most individuals attempt to preserve their current lifestyle and self-concept, clinging to the security of the known. However, the urge for inner growth eventually becomes too compelling to ignore. Choosing to embark on the journey requires bravery, as it demands letting go of established patterns and stepping into uncertainty, where previous coping mechanisms may no longer be effective. Integral to this journey is the child archetype, which symbolizes the innocent, imaginative, and creative parts of the self, facets that often become suppressed beneath adult obligations and societal expectations. Jung identified various expressions of the child archetype, including the divine child, a symbol of untapped potential and spiritual renewal, and the wounded child, which embodies the emotional scars and limitations inherited from early life. This archetype holds a profound capacity for resilience, delight, and imaginative thinking, qualities that frequently diminish as individuals pursue rationality and social achievement. Reclaiming a connection with this inner child is crucial for sustaining creativity, emotional vitality, and hope, especially during challenging times transitions or personal crises. A fundamental aspect of the hero's journey is the dynamic between the mature self and the child within. The hero must learn to both protect and nourish their inner child, while simultaneously cultivating the strength and capability needed to navigate adult life. Psychological imbalances often emerge when a person becomes overly identified with childlike avoidance of responsibility, or, conversely, when they suppress all childlike traits in favor of a rigid, over-controlled adult identity. True growth requires a synthesis of these opposing energies, merging childlike openness and imagination with adult strength and accountability. This integration fosters a well-rounded, mature personality, one that retains access to joy, spontaneity, and innovation while remaining grounded and capable in the face of life's inevitable hardships. With this balance, individuals are better equipped to confront adversity with both insight and renewed perspective, avoiding the disillusionment that can come from a purely adult worldview. Jung stressed that the hero's journey is not a singular event, but a cyclical process that recurs throughout life. Each major transition, whether adolescence, marriage, parenthood, career shifts, or aging, requires leaving behind a former identity and cultivating new qualities suited to the next phase. Recognizing these patterns as archetypal helps individuals reframe their struggles not as isolated or personal failings, but as part of a universal human experience. Moreover, understanding the hero's journey offers reassurance in times of hardship, suggesting that current difficulties may serve a higher purpose in one's overall development. It reinforces the idea that renewal and transformation are always within reach, no matter one's past or present challenges. Part 4. Trickster, Magician, and Cultural Archetypes. The trickster is one of the oldest and most psychologically potent archetypes in the human psyche. It embodies the force of creative disruption, an energy that unsettles established norms and opens the door to new possibilities. Appearing in nearly every cultural tradition, this figure can be seen in characters such as Loki from Norse mythology, the Native American coyote, and the African spider god Anansi. The trickster defies conventional logic and societal expectations, using wit, mischief, and subversive behavior to challenge the status quo. On a psychological level, the trickster symbolizes the inner voice that resists blind obedience, calls out hypocrisy, and refuses to conform to rigid moral or social frameworks. It plays a vital role in preserving mental adaptability and acts as a safeguard against the stagnation that comes from dogma or moral absolutism, both individually and collectively. In contrast, the magician archetype represents the human drive toward transformation, insight, and mastery over unseen forces. This archetype is linked to those who understand deeper truths and can access and manipulate hidden energies to bring about meaningful change, both internally and externally. When expressed positively, the magician brings wisdom, healing, and the capacity to guide others through personal or spiritual transformation. However, the magician also has a shadow side. This archetype can devolve into the manipulative sorcerer who distorts truth for personal gain, or into the inflated guru figure who oversteps human limits by claiming divine authority. Such distortions illustrate how archetypal power can become dangerous when used irresponsibly or egotistically. Cultural archetypes arise from the shared historical experiences and symbolic frameworks of particular societies. These archetypes express the core values, collective anxieties, and communal dreams that shape a group's identity. In the United States, for instance, recurring figures such as the self-made entrepreneur, the maverick rebel, and the trailblazing pioneer illustrate American ideals and myths. Other cultures foster different symbolic patterns, rooted in their own environments, histories, and societal challenges. These collective symbols deeply influence how individuals within a culture perceive themselves, structure their aspirations, and define meaningful success and relationships. Gaining awareness of cultural archetypes provides critical insight into why people from different backgrounds often struggle to understand one another, even when they share similar personality traits. Carl Jung noted that cultural archetypes become problematic when they are overly rigid or when they suppress essential aspects of the human experience. For instance, a culture that glorifies archetypes like the warrior or the king might undervalue traits associated with nurturing, empathy, or collaboration. Conversely, societies that idealize maternal or caregiving figures may find it difficult to integrate assertiveness, ambition, or competitive drive. As cultures evolve, so do their dominant archetypal patterns. This evolution is often driven by the need to adapt to new realities and develop more nuanced understandings of human potential. On an individual level, Psychological growth frequently involves reevaluating inherited cultural symbols and cultivating a more personal and balanced relationship with the deeper, universal archetypes. For those engaged in creative professions or innovation-driven work, the trickster and magician archetypes are especially critical. The trickster provides the courage to take risks, question conventional methods, and embrace failure as part of the process. The magician, in turn, brings the insight and discipline necessary to transform disorder into meaningful creation. Yet, both archetypes can become destructive if left unchecked. Unconscious engagement with the trickster may lead to pointless rebellion or chaos, while an unintegrated magician may fall into manipulation or self-delusion. Cultivating conscious awareness of these archetypal forces enables individuals to act as agents of positive transformation in both personal development and communal life, while avoiding the pitfalls of ego inflation and shadow identification that often accompany unchecked archetypal influence. Part 5. The Stages of Life. Carl Jung brought a transformative perspective to psychology by proposing that human development does not stop in childhood or adolescence, but continues throughout an individual's entire life. He outlined specific psychological challenges and developmental tasks that emerge at different life stages, each offering unique paths for growth, insight, and self-realization. Jung's model departed from strictly biological or social interpretations of human growth. Instead, he highlighted the inner psychological and spiritual dimensions that shape life transitions. He believed that outward life changes often reflect deeper internal shifts. By recognizing the symbolic and transformative potential of each stage, individuals can move through life's transitions with a greater sense of purpose and awareness. What may appear to be crises are frequently invitations to evolve, rather than mere problems demanding solutions. In Jung's framework, the first half of life, typically extending until around age 40, is primarily concerned with developing the ego and adjusting to the external world. During these formative decades, people work to define their identity, hone their abilities, build meaningful relationships, and establish themselves within society and the workplace. Key psychological tasks during this phase include separating from parental influences, cultivating self-confidence, forming intimate partnerships, and contributing to society through careers and family life. Success in this early stage is marked by constructing a solid ego, mastering life skills, and gaining recognition and security in one's external environment. However, as individuals approach their late 30s to early 50s, they often encounter a pivotal life passage, the midlife transition. During this time, goals and values that once felt fulfilling may start to lose their significance. Jung noted that this period can be marked by psychological unrest, as individuals begin to question whether their accomplishments have truly satisfied their deeper needs for meaning and purpose. This introspective phase often brings a heightened awareness of mortality, unrealized potential, and a desire to look inward rather than outward. Though this phase, commonly known as the midlife crisis, can be unsettling, Jung viewed it as a vital psychological reorientation. It signals a shift from a focus on external success to a deeper engagement with the inner self. This redirection of energy is central to the process of individuation, where personal growth becomes rooted in authenticity and spiritual depth. The second half of life calls for an entirely different psychological outlook. Rather than continuing to pursue ego-based goals or external accomplishments, individuals are challenged to align with values and purposes that transcend personal ambition. This stage encourages the development of wisdom rather than the mere accumulation of knowledge and the discovery of meaning in experiences of limitation, loss, and eventual mortality. Jung emphasized that this latter stage of life inherently takes on a religious or spiritual tone, not necessarily in a doctrinal sense, but in terms of seeking connection to something greater than the self. Individuals often become more attuned to transcendent ideals and begin to interpret their lives within a broader, more symbolic framework that places temporary worldly concerns in perspective. Every significant life transition, according to Jung, demands what he called a sacrifice of the previous attitude. This means that at each stage, individuals must relinquish old identities, goals, and psychological strategies that once served them but have now become barriers to further growth. For young adults, this involves letting go of childhood dependencies and fantasies in favor of adult responsibility and capability. At midlife, it means surrendering the illusion of boundless potential and eternal youth, and embracing maturity and acceptance. These psychological sacrifices rarely come easily. Transitions are often marked by resistance, emotional turmoil, periods of depression, or apparent regression. Yet these painful episodes are necessary precursors to new psychological attitudes and ways of being. By understanding the transformative nature of these symbolic deaths and rebirths, individuals can learn to approach life transitions with greater patience and faith in the process of human development, rather than resisting the changes that are both natural and essential. Part 6. Midlife Crisis and Psychological Transformation. Carl Jung identified the midlife crisis as one of the most profound turning points in adult psychological development and a crucial phase in the evolution of human consciousness. He observed that, typically between the late 30s and early 50s, many people undergo a deep and often unsettling reevaluation of their values, aspirations, and sense of identity, elements that once shaped the purpose and direction of their lives. This internal upheaval often surfaces in the form of depression, anxiety, strained relationships, dissatisfaction at work, or a pervasive feeling that life has become stagnant or hollow, despite outward accomplishments or material success. Rather than interpreting these symptoms as signs of mental illness, Jung viewed them as vital messages from the unconscious, signaling the need for a profound psychological reorientation and a shift in life's direction. Such crises often arise when individuals come to realize that the external goals they chased in early adulthood, career advancement, financial stability, or societal recognition, have failed to provide the lasting fulfillment they once anticipated. Accomplished professionals may find themselves disillusioned. Parents who dedicated years to raising children may begin to question their identity once their children become independent. Similarly, partners in long-term relationships may begin to wonder whether their emotional needs and deepest desires are genuinely being met. These realizations often lead to a period of deep introspection and existential questioning, which may feel like the collapse of a previously coherent life structure. Jung saw this disintegration not as a tragedy, but as a necessary step toward rebuilding the self on more authentic and mature psychological ground. At the heart of midlife psychological transformation lies a dramatic shift in the dynamic between conscious ego and the unconscious mind. In the earlier stages of life, the ego typically dominates, steering decisions through personal ambition, societal pressures, and calculated goal setting. As one approaches midlife, however, the unconscious begins to make itself heard with greater insistence. This often happens through dreams, fantasies, emotional disturbances, and unexpected attractions that conflict with the ego's carefully laid plans. What results is an inner struggle between the familiar identity constructed over decades and new, unconscious elements of the psyche that demand recognition and integration into conscious awareness. Jung identified recurring patterns in this transformative phase. Many individuals start to question the persona they have cultivated for success in their careers and social circles, realizing that this outward facade may no longer reflect their true feelings and inner values. There's frequently a renewed curiosity about long-neglected parts of the self, creative talents set aside for more practical pursuits, or emotional dimensions once suppressed in the name of logic and productivity. As this inner exploration deepens, repressed or disowned traits, what Jung called the shadow, may surface with greater intensity. People become increasingly aware of desires and impulses they have long denied or projected onto others. Navigating this turbulent phase successfully requires developing what Jung described as a religious attitude, not necessarily a belief in organized religion, but a deep-seated willingness to serve something greater than one's personal ego and its ambitions. This attitude involves embracing the idea that life holds meanings and purposes that go beyond individual success or gratification. It calls for listening to the voice of the unconscious while simultaneously maintaining the strength and clarity of ego needed to handle everyday responsibilities. The integration of these conflicting forces is rarely swift. It is a gradual and ongoing process. Over the course of several years, individuals undergoing this transformation may experience major changes in their relationships, career paths, and overall lifestyle as they begin to align their external world with their inner truth and strive to live in greater harmony with their authentic self. Part 7. The Integration of Opposites. Carl Jung's concept of the integration of opposites stands as one of his most profound contributions to our understanding of psychological well-being and spiritual evolution. He recognized that human beings are inherently composed of contradictory traits, conflicting drives, and opposing viewpoints. These internal polarities often give rise to psychological distress and inner tension. Instead of attempting to eliminate these internal conflicts or choosing one side at the expense of the other, Jung concluded that genuine psychological growth arises from the ability to consciously hold opposing forces in balance. This deliberate holding of tension between opposites gives rise to a new and transformative synthesis, what Jung termed the transcendent function. Through this process, the psyche can develop new ways of thinking and being that go beyond the limitations of either extreme. This transformation is not achieved through logical reasoning or sheer force of will. At its core, the most essential psychological polarity is the divide between the conscious mind and the unconscious. Consciousness is naturally inclined toward order, structure, and logical understanding, while the unconscious harbors chaotic, instinctual, and irrational elements, often in direct opposition to conscious goals and values. Psychological disturbances frequently emerge when individuals attempt to assert total conscious control, dismissing or suppressing the valid insights and needs that arise from the unconscious. True integration requires the ability to remain aware and grounded while also being receptive to the influence of the unconscious. It calls for an ongoing interplay between the rational and the irrational, fostering internal dialogue rather than domination by one side. Beyond the conscious-unconscious divide, Jung identified other critical psychological polarities: thinking versus feeling, sensation versus intuition, extroversion versus introversion, and the psychological aspects typically associated with masculinity and femininity. Most people naturally favor one side of each of these dualities, often relegating the opposite qualities to the unconscious. While this can foster certain strengths, it also leaves individuals vulnerable to blind spots and imbalances in their development. Mature psychological growth involves expanding and cultivating the less dominant aspects of the personality, not by discarding the more developed functions, but by complementing them. This leads to a more adaptive, nuanced, and whole personality structure. However, the path to integration often triggers resistance and fear, particularly when individuals begin to engage with traits or capacities that feel alien or threatening to their established self-concept. Jung stressed that integration is not about eliminating inner conflict or achieving a static state of harmony. Instead, it is about developing the inner strength to remain grounded amid the push and pull of psychological opposites. This capacity gives rise to what Jung called creative tension, a vital and energizing force that fuels insight, innovation, and personal evolution. Those who succeed in integrating their internal opposites often exhibit a unique psychological resilience and depth. They can navigate ambiguous or demanding circumstances with flexibility, without collapsing into rigidity or confusion. This ability also profoundly affects interpersonal dynamics and social understanding. Jung noted that many relationship difficulties stem from the unconscious projection of internal conflicts onto others. These projections externalize unresolved inner struggles, generating interpersonal friction. As individuals become more conscious of their own inner contradictions, they are less prone to project and more equipped to see others clearly and empathetically. Such psychological maturity fosters greater compassion, openness, and the ability to engage in authentic dialogue across differences in thought, personality, and cultural experience. Part 8. Jung's approach to dream analysis. Carl Jung's interpretation of dreams marked a profound shift from the Freudian tradition, positioning dreams as a vital source of psychological insight and guidance for the conscious mind. Unlike Freud, who believed dreams were primarily expressions of hidden sexual desires in the form of masked wish fulfillments, Jung saw dreams as serving a balancing or compensatory role within the psyche. He believed that dreams offer viewpoints and knowledge that help offset and harmonize the conscious attitudes of the individual. To Jung, dreams were not encrypted puzzles requiring intellectual decoding, but direct expressions from the unconscious, articulated in their own symbolic language. Understanding these symbols demands an appreciation for their inherent meaning, rather than forcing them into fixed definitions or abstract theories. Jung introduced a technique called amplification, a process that enriches the interpretation of dream symbols by linking them to broader cultural, mythological, and archetypal contexts. This method moved beyond simply considering the dreamer's personal experiences. For instance, if a dream featured a snake, Jung would explore not only the individual's specific feelings or memories about snakes, but also the rich symbolic history of serpents found in global myths, religions, and folklore. This dual approach acknowledges that dream imagery frequently contains both deeply personal and widely shared meanings, effectively tying individual psychological growth to overarching themes in human culture and wisdom. Through amplification, the archetypal layers within dreams are brought into focus without disconnecting them from the personal significance they hold for the dreamer. Jung's idea of the compensatory function of dreams suggests that they often present imagery that contrasts with, or provides balance to, the dreamer's waking thoughts and behavior. For example, a person who relies heavily on logic and suppresses emotion might dream of chaotic natural disasters like floods or storms. Conversely, someone who habitually avoids responsibility could dream of themselves in positions of leadership or command. A recurring theme in dreams is the shadow archetype, typically symbolized by unsettling figures such as criminals, ominous strangers, or same-gender individuals representing the traits the dreamer has rejected or refused to acknowledge. Rather than treating these disturbing images as threats or problems, Jung urged individuals to approach them as opportunities for learning about the repressed or undeveloped parts of the self. Jung also noticed that dreams tend to appear in series, where symbols and motifs evolve gradually over time, suggesting a continuous dialogue between the conscious and unconscious aspects of the psyche. By keeping a detailed dream journal and noting the recurrence of particular images, characters, and scenarios, individuals can begin to discern underlying psychological patterns and their relevance to real-life experiences and challenges. Some dreams seem to directly respond to current life situations, acting as immediate psychological counterpoints. Others, however, appear to anticipate future events or offer valuable direction during major life choices or personal transformations. The most profound dreams often involve archetypal symbols that tie an individual's internal journey to universal human themes and spiritual processes. Jung stressed that meaningful dream interpretation demands active involvement from the dreamer. Rather than relying passively on the interpretations of experts, individuals are encouraged to engage with their dreams through practices like active imagination, artistic expression, and deep introspection. Discovering what a dream means is a personal journey that requires honesty, creativity, and emotional openness. Since dreams rarely yield their wisdom quickly, they call for patience, persistence, and a willingness to explore them from multiple angles. The ultimate purpose of working with dreams is not to pin down a single, definitive meaning, but to cultivate a lasting, dynamic relationship with the unconscious. This ongoing inner dialogue enriches self-awareness and supports the lifelong psychological journey of individuation, the process of becoming whole. Part 9. Active imagination. Active imagination stands as Carl Jung's most original therapeutic innovation and his foremost contribution to methods that directly engage the unconscious. This technique involves intentionally immersing oneself in imaginative experiences while sustaining enough conscious presence to observe, respond to, and interact with the psychological material that arises. Unlike casual fantasizing or aimless daydreams, active imagination demands concentrated attention and a willingness to engage in sincere dialogue with the inner figures and symbols that surface, entities that seem to carry their own motives, attitudes, and perspectives. Jung began developing this method during the intense inner turmoil that followed his split with Freud. At that time, he used active imagination to confront and explore the disturbing contents of his psyche, material that would later take form in his renowned Red Book. The process begins by entering a relaxed yet consciously alert state of mind, which allows inner images, characters, or scenes to arise spontaneously from the depths of the unconscious. The key is not to manipulate or guide these images, but to attentively witness what appears and respond as though encountering actual, autonomous beings or situations with psychological reality. This can involve speaking with dreamlike characters, moving through imagined environments, or observing dramatic internal events as they unfold, all while maintaining full self-awareness and ethical responsibility. What distinguishes active imagination is the seriousness with which these inner experiences are taken. They are treated not as idle fantasy, but as meaningful expressions of the psyche with genuine psychological significance. Jung came to see this technique as a gateway to archetypal realms and a vital method for constructively engaging with psychological complexes. Figures from nightmares or disturbing dreams, often experienced as threatening, can be confronted in active imagination and revealed as bearers of insight or hidden strengths, transforming from menacing forces into beneficial allies. Similarly, inner images of the Anima or Animus, the inner feminine in men, and the inner masculine in women can be engaged in dialogue, providing a path toward integrating these contrasexual aspects of the psyche in a more conscious and balanced way. Through such encounters, individuals can also explore their personal complexes, deep emotional patterns formed by past experiences, understanding their origins and psychological needs, and discovering how they might evolve. Active imagination offers a structured, conscious way to engage with these intense inner dynamics without being overwhelmed by them. However, Jung cautioned that the method requires a strong sense of ethical awareness and clear psychological boundaries. It is crucial to avoid being overtaken or possessed by the autonomous forces of the unconscious. Practitioners must remain grounded in ego consciousness and uphold personal moral responsibility even when confronted with powerful archetypal energies or raw, primitive content. This involves resisting the urge to act on destructive impulses that may emerge and maintaining a firm distinction between the imagined and the real world. Far from serving as a retreat from external life, active imagination should deepen one's engagement with reality. It provides insights, emotional vitality, and psychological clarity that can enhance relationships and real-world responsibilities rather than becoming a form of escapism. Jung observed that this method often leads to creative breakthroughs and healing transformations that conventional, rational approaches to psychology struggle to achieve. Inner conflicts that seemed irresolvable through logic alone may find resolution when allowed to play out symbolically in the imagination. Similarly, innovative and unexpected solutions to real-life challenges frequently arise through dialogues with unconscious figures. By maintaining an open channel to the deeper layers of the psyche, active imagination supports ongoing psychological growth throughout life. For many, regular use of this practice strengthens creativity, fosters emotional stability, and deepens self-awareness. It becomes a dependable source of inner wisdom, especially during times of upheaval, major life transitions, or complex decision-making. Ultimately, active imagination offers a powerful, lifelong tool for inner development and conscious integration of the unconscious. Part 10. Word Association and Other Therapeutic Techniques. Jung's pioneering work with word association tests transformed the field's understanding of unconscious mental activity and offered the first empirical validation of the existence of autonomous psychological complexes. In these studies, Jung would present patients with a series of stimulus words and closely monitor their reactions. He carefully recorded the timing and emotional responses associated with each word, noting any delays, irregular answers, or signs of emotional tension. Repeatedly, certain words cause measurable hesitation, memory blanks, or physical shifts, all of which pointed to deeply charged psychological content operating independently of the person's conscious awareness. These findings made it clear that the unconscious mind is structured and capable of disrupting conscious mental processes, providing scientific support for psychoanalytic claims regarding repressed psychological material. Beyond word associations, Jung introduced a number of innovative therapeutic methods that emphasized engaging with the symbolic and creative dimensions of the unconscious mind, moving away from purely verbal techniques of interpretation and analysis. He encouraged individuals to explore their inner world through artistic creation, bodily movement, sand play, and other nonverbal forms of expression. These methods helped bypass intellectual defenses and allowed unconscious themes to surface in a more direct and impactful way. Jung believed that many profound psychological truths resist verbal expression and instead require symbolic or artistic representation to be fully understood and emotionally integrated. Such creative methods often uncover core psychological issues and potential resolutions that remain obscured when therapy is restricted to verbal reasoning and intellectual dialogue. One central technique in Jungian analysis is known as amplification. This method involves deepening the understanding of personal experiences, such as dreams, symptoms, or emotional challenges, by linking them to broader mythological, cultural, or archetypal themes. When a patient brings forth a meaningful dream or significant life event, the therapist helps expand its meaning by exploring its parallels with stories, symbols, and traditions found across diverse cultures and spiritual systems. This process allows individuals to see their personal struggles as part of a shared human experience, rather than viewing them as isolated or purely individual problems. Such an expanded context often brings comfort, perspective, and renewed insight during times of psychological distress. Amplification also illuminates the archetypal layer within personal experience, creating connections between the individual's psychological journey and the deeper currents of collective human meaning. In addition to these methods, Jung also introduced psychological typology as a vital therapeutic framework for understanding personality diversity and improving interpersonal dynamics. By helping patients identify their innate psychological preferences and understand the limitations caused by underdeveloped aspects of their psyche, therapy could support the cultivation of greater emotional adaptability and internal balance. Recognizing individual differences in how people process information and make decisions enhances relational communication by affirming that differing approaches are not inherently wrong or disordered, but rather reflect natural psychological variation. This perspective shifts therapeutic goals away from changing core personality traits and toward fostering self-acceptance and more effective use of one's psychological strengths, while also working to address and integrate areas of weakness. Perhaps Jung's most profound contribution to psychotherapy lay in his understanding of the healing power inherent in the therapeutic relationship itself. He viewed this relationship not as a one-sided treatment administered by an expert, but as a process of mutual transformation in which both therapist and patient are changed. Jung stressed that therapists must be genuinely engaged and willing to be affected by their interactions with clients. He rejected the notion of hiding behind a detached professional role or rigid theoretical system, instead calling for therapists to bring authenticity and self-awareness to the therapeutic encounter. This approach requires therapists to continually reflect on their own inner development, acknowledging their own unresolved complexes and projections that might influence the therapeutic process. In Jung's view, therapy is a shared search for psychological truth, not merely the correction of pathology. At its core, he believed that real psychological healing and growth arise through sincere human connection, grounded in openness, humility, and mutual respect. Part 11. The Unconscious. Carl Gustav Jung fundamentally reshaped the field of psychology by unveiling the hidden dimensions of the human psyche. Born in 1875 in a quiet Swiss village, Jung was deeply influenced by the mysterious and often unexplainable events of his childhood, which sparked a lifelong interest in the unseen forces behind human behavior. Though he began his career as a psychiatrist, Jung's path took a pivotal turn through his collaboration with Sigmund Freud, who initially considered him his intellectual heir. However, by 1913, Jung's increasingly divergent views on the unconscious caused a decisive split from Freud. While Freud conceived of the unconscious as a storehouse for repressed desires, especially those of a sexual nature, and unresolved trauma, Jung perceived it as something much richer and more dynamic. He came to understand the unconscious not merely as a passive vault of buried experiences, but as an active, evolving system that interacts constantly with our conscious awareness. Through years of observation, Jung noticed that many of his patients described dreams, symbols, and fantasies that bore no clear link to their personal histories. What stood out was the recurring nature of these images across individuals from vastly different cultural backgrounds and time periods. This led him to propose a groundbreaking model of the unconscious, consisting of two distinct layers. The first of these layers, which he called the personal unconscious, consists of all the experiences and thoughts that have fallen out of conscious awareness throughout a person's life. This includes forgotten memories, repressed emotions, unresolved experiences, and ideas once considered trivial or too painful to recall. Jung likened it to an expansive archive in which every past impression is stored, regardless of whether we are aware of it. These hidden elements continue to exert influence, often surfacing through emotional reactions, instinctive behaviors, or preferences that seem to arise without explanation. Jung's most revolutionary insight, however, was the identification of a second, deeper layer, the collective unconscious. Unlike the personal unconscious, this layer is not shaped by individual experience. Instead, it houses the inherited psychological patterns shared by all human beings. Jung observed that specific motifs, symbols, and behavioral tendencies appear with remarkable consistency across diverse cultures and historical periods. This universality pointed to a source deeper than individual learning or cultural background, a shared psychic inheritance rooted in the human species itself. Within the collective unconscious reside what Jung termed archetypes, primordial images and themes that reflect essential aspects of human existence. These include timeless motifs such as the experience of birth and death, the nurturing mother, the wise elder, and the heroic quest. Archetypes help explain why people from unrelated societies craft similar myths, experience comparable dream imagery, and react to symbolic content in similar ways. For instance, the maternal figure can be seen globally, whether as the Christian Virgin Mary, the Hindu goddess Parvati, or prehistoric Earth Mother deities. These archetypal forms arise naturally in dreams, religious visions, artistic expressions, and mythological narratives. Jung believed they reflect the innate architecture of human consciousness itself. By becoming aware of these universal structures, individuals could access a deeper layer of understanding and draw meaning from their personal challenges. This connection to collective human wisdom, he argued, could offer profound psychological healing and guidance. Jung also discovered that the unconscious mind communicates with the conscious self through a rich and nuanced symbolic language. Dreams, spontaneous images, inner fantasies, and even psychological disturbances can serve as messages from the unconscious. These symbols are not random. They are purposeful attempts to restore inner balance and foster psychological development. In contrast to Freud's interpretation of dreams as veiled wish fulfillment, Jung viewed them as corrective tools, offering perspectives and insights lacking in the conscious mind and pointing the way toward inner integration. For Jung, the unconscious was not simply a chaotic storehouse of hidden thoughts. It possessed a form of intelligence, often more insightful than our rational processes, and held the potential to solve problems that reason alone could not. Through dialogue with this deeper self, individuals could pursue what Jung called individuation, the journey toward wholeness, self-understanding, and harmony between the inner and outer worlds. Part 12. Psychic Energy. Carl Jung transformed the field of psychology by proposing that the human mind functions as an energy system governed by laws similar to those found in physics. He introduced the idea of libido as a form of psychological energy that flows throughout the psyche, much like electricity travels through a circuit. Unlike Sigmund Freud, who defined libido purely as sexual energy, Jung broadened the concept. He saw it as a general life force that fuels a wide range of human activities: creative expression, spiritual searching, intellectual efforts, and emotional bonds. This psychic energy is constantly in motion, shifting between different elements of the psyche and generating the dynamic patterns we see in human thoughts and behaviors. Jung identified a key principle governing this energy flow, which he called compensation. According to this principle, when a person's conscious outlook becomes overly skewed or rigid in one direction, the unconscious mind activates counterbalancing forces to restore psychological equilibrium. For instance, an individual who excessively prioritizes logic and suppresses emotion may begin to experience dreams or fantasies that reintroduce the neglected emotional dimension into their awareness. This compensatory process plays a crucial role in maintaining internal harmony by preventing any one psychological function from overwhelming the rest. The movement of psychic energy within the mind also gives rise to what Jung described as complexes, emotionally charged clusters of thoughts and memories that function somewhat independently within the personality. These complexes can absorb significant amounts of energy, often resulting in sudden emotional shifts, obsessive thinking, or compulsive behavior. Jung noted that when energy becomes trapped within a complex, it usually signals a deeper issue that needs to be acknowledged and worked through consciously. By examining how psychic energy flows, we can better understand why certain events provoke intense emotional responses, or why some individuals become preoccupied with specific ideas or people. Jung observed that this energy doesn't move in a straight line. Instead, it follows a cyclical rhythm that alternates between forward-moving, progressive, and backward-moving, regressive phases. During progressive periods, the energy supports outward-focused goals and helps individuals build their identity and function effectively in the external world. In contrast, during regressive phases, energy turns inward, drawing attention away from outer achievements and toward unconscious material. These periods often evoke early life memories, primal fantasies, or archetypal imagery. Jung did not view regression as a sign of psychological dysfunction. Instead, he saw it as a vital process that allows the individual to reconnect with the deeper layers of the psyche, sources of creativity, insight, and renewal. This framework of psychological energy also sheds light on the phenomenon of inflation, where a person becomes over-identified with powerful archetypal forces. When an individual unconsciously aligns themselves with an archetype, such as the wise elder or the heroic figure, they may begin to exhibit exaggerated self-importance and feel as though they possess extraordinary powers. Inflation arises because archetypal energy is collective in nature, not personal. When it enters the individual psyche unchecked, it can distort the ego and produce dangerous illusions of grandeur. Jung stressed the importance of recognizing the independent, autonomous quality of archetypal forces. By doing so, individuals can avoid being overtaken by these energies and maintain healthy boundaries between the ego and the collective unconscious. Part 13. Psychological Types. Carl Jung developed his theory of psychological types through years of clinical experience and deep personal reflection. He became increasingly aware of significant differences in how individuals perceive reality and respond to the world around them. From this exploration, he identified two primary attitude types that shape where people direct their mental and emotional energy: extroversion and introversion. Although now widely used in everyday language, Jung's original definitions of extroversion and introversion are often misunderstood. He did not view them as fixed personality traits, but rather as orientations that describe the natural direction of a person's psychological energy. For extroverts, this energy flows outward toward the external world, toward people, activities, and tangible experiences. Those with an extroverted orientation are typically energized by interaction with others. They seek stimulation through engagement with their surroundings and are inclined to focus on external events when making choices. Extroverts often express their thoughts openly, process experiences through dialogue, and are comfortable acting quickly without prolonged internal deliberation. While they often come across as socially confident and expressive, they may find it difficult to be alone for extended periods and usually avoid deep introspection. In contrast, introversion involves directing psychological energy inward toward one's own thoughts, emotions, and subjective experiences. Introverts tend to feel most energized by solitude and often prefer to reflect privately before sharing their thoughts or making decisions. They naturally prioritize their inner responses to situations and typically take time to think carefully before speaking. After social interaction, they often need solitude to recharge and are comfortable with prolonged contemplation. Introverts are often perceived as introspective and composed, though they may find spontaneous group interactions challenging and usually avoid large or overly stimulating social settings. Jung believed that these two orientations are largely innate and remain consistent throughout a person's life. While individuals can develop the opposite attitude through intentional effort, most people have a dominant preference, with the less preferred orientation remaining unconscious or underdeveloped. This imbalance can lead to a kind of psychological compensation, where the unconscious brings forward dreams, fantasies, or emotional attractions that reflect the repressed attitude. Such compensatory mechanisms often encourage individuals to confront and integrate the lesser developed side of their personality. Understanding these fundamental psychological preferences can help illuminate common sources of misunderstanding in relationships and collaboration, particularly between extroverted and introverted individuals who often approach communication and decision-making in markedly different ways. Jung also recognized that within each attitude type, people exhibit distinct preferences in how they perceive information and make judgments. Some individuals rely heavily on sensory input, valuing practical details and observable facts, while others gravitate toward intuitive insights, favoring abstract ideas, patterns, and future possibilities. Likewise, when making decisions, some prioritize logical reasoning and objective standards, whereas others emphasize personal values and the emotional impact of their choices on others. These cognitive preferences, how we take in information and how we decide what to do with it, form an essential part of Jung's psychological type theory. Together with extroversion and introversion, they create a rich framework for understanding how individuals differ in their approaches to life, work, and relationships. Part 14. The Four Psychological Functions. Carl Jung identified four core psychological functions that shape how individuals interpret information and make decisions. These functions act like internal instruments, each offering a distinct lens through which we engage with reality, ultimately contributing to a fuller understanding of the world around us. While every person possesses all four of these functions, Jung found that individuals usually develop one or two more prominently. The remaining functions often stay less conscious and less refined. This uneven development can create both advantages and vulnerabilities, influencing personality traits, career preferences, and how we relate to others. Thinking is the function that approaches information through logic, objectivity, and rational analysis. Those who lead with thinking tend to prioritize evidence, structure, and consistency. They often base decisions on factual accuracy and clear reasoning, often minimizing emotional or social influence in the process. People who primarily use the thinking function excel at dissecting problems, creating strategies, and mastering complex systems. However, they may find it challenging to fully account for emotional nuances or interpersonal impact. Although they might seem emotionally distant or impersonal, their impartiality enables them to remain fair and principled, even when tensions are high. Feeling, in contrast, evaluates situations through the lens of personal values and emotional relevance. Individuals who rely on the feeling function make choices based on what feels morally right to them and on how decisions will affect others. They are often gifted in understanding emotional dynamics, building rapport, and fostering harmony in relationships. These individuals are adept at recognizing what drives human behavior and preserving relational balance. Yet they may find objective analysis difficult, especially when it leads to outcomes that could cause discomfort or pain. Feeling types typically come across as empathetic and sincere, and their focus on values helps them forge deep connections and sustain group unity. Sensation is grounded in tangible experience and present moment awareness. Those who favor this function trust their five senses and prefer dealing with concrete facts over abstract ideas or future uncertainties. They are skilled at observing details, working hands-on, and solving practical, immediate problems. Sensation-dominant individuals often seem pragmatic and down-to-earth. Their strong connection to the physical world makes them well-suited for environments that demand accuracy, efficiency, and real-time responsiveness. However, they may struggle with abstract thinking or long-term conceptual planning. Intuition, on the other hand, gravitates toward the abstract, perceiving patterns, potential outcomes, and underlying meanings that are not immediately visible. Intuitive types focus on what could be rather than what is. They are often forward-thinking, imaginative, and attuned to emerging possibilities. These individuals are known for seeing overarching patterns and generating novel ideas, often thriving in roles that require creativity and conceptual depth. However, they may find it difficult to handle mundane details or commit to routine follow-through. Intuitive people are often seen as visionary and original, with a natural talent for strategic foresight and innovation. Jung observed that these four functions exist in pairs of opposites. Thinking is paired with feeling, and sensation with intuition. Each pair represents a fundamental polarity within the psyche. To reconcile the inherent tension between these opposites, Jung introduced the concept of the transcendent function, a psychological mechanism that facilitates the integration of conflicting elements. The transcendent function arises when conscious awareness interacts meaningfully with unconscious material, generating new insights that go beyond the limitations of either viewpoint alone. Cultivating this integrative ability is crucial for inner growth, allowing individuals to resolve internal conflicts and adopt more balanced, creative approaches to life. Part 15. Complexes. One of Carl Jung's most groundbreaking insights into the psyche was his identification of psychological complexes. Through his pioneering use of word association tests, Jung discovered that certain words produce delayed reactions, emotional intensity, or lapses in memory, clues pointing to the existence of autonomous psychological systems operating independently of conscious awareness. These complexes function almost like separate personalities within the mind, each with its own emotional tone, set of memories, and characteristic behaviors. In some situations, they can temporarily dominate our awareness, influencing how we think, feel, and act. Jung concluded that all individuals harbor multiple complexes, and gaining insight into their nature is essential for psychological well-being and personal growth. A complex emerges when emotionally significant thoughts, experiences, and associations cluster around a central archetypal image. Take, for instance, the mother complex. It can comprise memories of one's actual mother, societal or cultural ideas of motherhood, and the deeper archetypal figure of the Great Mother rooted in the collective unconscious. When this complex is activated, it may cause someone to respond to certain individuals or situations as though they were interacting with their mother, regardless of the true context. What makes complexes particularly impactful is their autonomy. They operate according to their own logic and can override conscious reasoning when triggered. Jung noted that these complexes often take shape in childhood, when powerful emotional experiences become linked with universal archetypal themes, creating enduring psychological structures. For example, a child who suffers neglect or abandonment might develop a complex centered on rejection and inadequacy, which continues to shape their adult relationships and perceptions. Such complexes function like psychological attractors, drawing similar experiences and interpreting vague or ambiguous events in ways that reinforce their patterns. Recognizing and understanding one's personal complexes is key to explaining why certain people or situations evoke disproportionately intense emotional responses, or why individuals find themselves repeatedly facing the same relational challenges. Complexes often reveal themselves through psychological mechanisms, such as projection, where a person unknowingly attributes the contents of their own complex onto someone else. For instance, an unresolved father complex might lead a person to see authority figures either as idealized protectors or as oppressive threats, depending on the specific configuration of their complex. They may also surface through psychological inflation, in which a person becomes fused with archetypal content and loses sight of their own limits. Someone caught in a savior complex might believe they are destined to rescue others, becoming grandiose or adopting a messianic persona. To effectively engage with complexes, Jung emphasized the importance of cultivating what he termed conscious realization, the capacity to recognize when a complex has taken over and to discern between reactions driven by the complex and those grounded in the present reality. Jung devised therapeutic methods such as active imagination and dream interpretation to facilitate dialogue with these internal structures and bring their contents into conscious awareness. Rather than attempting to eliminate complexes, which Jung deemed both futile and undesirable, the aim is to develop a constructive relationship with them. Once acknowledged and integrated, complexes can transform into vital sources of creative expression, emotional depth, and psychic vitality, rather than remaining disruptive influences that generate suffering and conflict in one's life. Part 16. The Individuation Process. Carl Jung saw individuation as the cornerstone of psychological growth and the ultimate aim of analytical psychology. This lifelong journey entails gradually becoming aware of and integrating the diverse aspects of the psyche, ultimately forming a cohesive and authentic self. In contrast to mere ego development, which is primarily concerned with meeting societal norms and external demands, individuation involves confronting the unconscious, even when it disrupts or contradicts our conscious self-perceptions and beliefs. Unlike surface-level adaptations, this path demands honest introspection and the courage to face inner truths that may be uncomfortable or unsettling. Jung believed individuation is a natural unfolding that occurs over time, but it also requires active engagement and personal responsibility. This inner transformation often begins in midlife, a period when many people begin re-evaluating the beliefs, ambitions, and values that once gave their lives direction. Jung noted that individuals in their 30s or 40s frequently encounter a psychological turning point. Despite external accomplishments, a sense of disillusionment may arise, prompting questions about purpose and meaning. During this period, people may struggle with depression, anxiety, strained relationships, or a pervasive feeling of emptiness, symptoms Jung understood as signals from the unconscious, urging the individual to embark on a deeper quest for wholeness. At the outset of this journey, A key task is the withdrawal of psychological projections. Individuals must begin to recognize and reclaim parts of themselves they have unknowingly assigned to others, be it people, ideologies, or institutions. This stage involves coming to terms with the shadow, those repressed elements of the personality that conflict with one's conscious self-image and have been pushed into the unconscious. Another essential aspect of individuation is the integration of opposites within the psyche. Jung described this through the concepts of the Anima in men and Animus in women, representing the unconscious, complementary traits and attitudes that balance the conscious personality. Acknowledging and embracing these inner counterparts allows for a more complete and nuanced sense of self. As the process deepens, one's relationship with the ego begins to shift. The ego, once considered the central authority of the personality, must learn to defer to a more profound inner center, the self, which emerges through the union of conscious awareness and unconscious wisdom. This reorientation can bring about periods of confusion and instability, as established identity structures fall away and new ones are not yet fully formed. Jung likened this transformational stage to alchemical processes of dissolution and rebirth, where the old self must symbolically die in order to make space for a more genuine and integrated identity to emerge. Importantly, the aim of individuation is not flawless perfection, but rather wholeness, a state that includes acceptance of one's flaws, internal contradictions, and the unavoidable presence of suffering in life. Through this process, individuals often develop what Jung described as a religious attitude toward existence, not necessarily tied to organized religion, but characterized by a sense of reverence for life and connection to a greater reality beyond personal ego concerns. They gain the ability to hold opposing truths and tolerate inner conflict without rushing toward easy solutions or denial. Ultimately, individuation fosters a profound appreciation for the richness and complexity of human life. Jung emphasized that this journey is never truly finished. It is a continuous path of inner development, growth, and self-realization that evolves throughout a person's lifetime. Part 17. The Self-Archetype. Carl Jung's most profound insight into the structure of the human psyche was the concept of the self. Unlike the ego, which acts as the hub of conscious thought and awareness, the self encompasses the entirety of the psyche, both conscious and unconscious, and serves as the underlying principle that brings cohesion to the personality as a whole. Jung identified the self as both the ultimate aim of the individuation process and the unseen force that guides personal growth from within. This archetype does not appear all at once but reveals itself gradually as a person integrates the many facets of their personality and moves toward a fuller understanding of their authentic nature. The self makes its presence known through symbolic representations in consciousness. These symbols evoke feelings of unity, fulfillment, and transcendence. They often take the form of geometric shapes, such as mandalas, circles, or squares, and may also include archetypal images like deities, sages, or mythological figures that signify supreme wisdom and authority. Jung observed that individuals undergoing deep psychological change frequently experience spontaneous inclinations to draw circular patterns, or find themselves drawn to religious or spiritual imagery that reflects themes of unity and wholeness. These symbols of the self tend to emerge in dreams, through active imagination, and in creative expression, all as efforts by the psyche to visualize its deepest ordering force. As individuation unfolds, the relationship between the ego and the self undergoes a profound shift. In early life, the ego typically operates under the illusion that it is the center of personality, making choices influenced by personal ambition, societal norms, and logical reasoning. Yet as individuation deepens, the ego begins to recognize the superior wisdom of the self, a guiding presence that sees beyond the ego's limited perspective and offers insight into life's greater purpose. This transition demands that the ego relinquish its illusion of omnipotence and adopt what Jung referred to as a religious attitude, an inner posture of humility and reverence toward powers greater than the conscious will. Jung noted that the self often communicates with consciousness through synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that reveal an unseen pattern or intelligence shaping events beyond the ego's control. Individuals may come to see that major turning points in life follow a kind of inner logic, only becoming clear in hindsight as though orchestrated by a hidden hand. The self also expresses itself through what Jung called the transcendent function, an inner mechanism that reconciles opposites within the psyche, giving rise to new perspectives and creative solutions to inner conflicts. These moments serve as evidence that psychological growth is being guided by something greater than the ego alone, a deeper intelligence that shapes one's path towards self-realization. When the self emerges into conscious awareness as a vital, living presence, it marks the completion of individuation and the attainment of mature psychological wholeness. People who cultivate a conscious relationship with the self often exhibit a grounded inner presence and a quiet authority that does not rely on external approval or success. They are able to make difficult choices rooted in inner conviction rather than conformity, and they possess the resilience to embrace ambiguity and contradiction without being thrown off balance. Jung stressed that encountering the self does not eliminate life's difficulties, but it provides a firm inner center from which to face those challenges, with wisdom, compassion, and a deep commitment to authentic self-expression. Part 18. The Shadow. Among Carl Jung's most profound and socially relevant contributions to psychology is the concept of the shadow. This archetype includes all the traits and instincts that individuals reject or deem unacceptable, burying them deep within the unconscious. In effect, the shadow becomes a hidden mirror to the socially acceptable face we present to the world, the persona. While it often contains negative attributes such as aggression, selfishness, or primal urges, the shadow is not entirely dark. It also holds suppressed strengths and potentials that may conflict with societal norms or challenge one's idealized self-image. Jung stressed that everyone carries a shadow and that true psychological well-being comes from confronting and integrating these disowned parts of the self, not from denying their existence. The development of the shadow begins in early childhood. As children are socialized, they learn, through both direct instruction and subtle cues from parents, teachers, and peers, which behaviors are rewarded and which are deemed inappropriate. To be accepted, children adopt socially approved roles and behaviors, gradually constructing a persona. Simultaneously, those traits judged as unacceptable are cast out of awareness and pushed into the unconscious, forming the shadow. This division is essential for functioning in society, yet it also creates a psychological split that can lead to inner conflict if the shadow remains entirely unconscious. What ends up in a person's shadow is heavily shaped by cultural background, family norms, and individual experiences, which explains why the contents of the shadow differ so widely from one person or group to another. One of the primary ways the shadow manifests is through psychological projection. This occurs when people unconsciously attribute their own repressed traits to others. For instance, someone who has buried their own aggressive tendencies might be especially sensitive to perceived hostility in others, reacting with intense moral indignation to minor acts of assertiveness. On a broader scale, collective projections help explain the roots of prejudice and social tension as communities disown parts of themselves by projecting them onto other ethnic, religious, or political groups. Jung noted that the traits we criticize most harshly in others are often reflections of parts of ourselves we refuse to face. Our dreams can provide an initial window into the shadow. These may feature unsettling imagery, such as dark strangers, criminals, wild animals, or figures of the same sex, who personify the traits the dreamer finds repugnant. These dream figures often chase, attack, or confront the dreamer, symbolizing the inner struggle to recognize and accept the rejected elements of the self. Rather than avoiding or battling these figures, Jung encouraged individuals to engage with them. Within these dream images lie potent psychological energy and potential that, once integrated, can enrich the conscious personality. Techniques such as active imagination can facilitate a dialogue with these inner figures, helping to transform them from menacing antagonists into supportive allies. Embracing the shadow demands deep courage and honesty, as it involves recognizing parts of the self that may stand in direct opposition to one's self-image and moral values. Yet Jung discovered that doing so does not corrupt the personality, it strengthens it. Through shadow integration, individuals unlock untapped reservoirs of vitality, creativity, and authenticity. Those who succeed in integrating significant portions of their shadow often become more passionate, grounded, and emotionally resilient. At the same time, they gain a deeper sense of humility and compassion, both toward themselves and toward the imperfections of others. Jung warned that attempting to eliminate the shadow altogether leads not to purity, but to psychological inflation and vulnerability to unconscious forces. By contrast, conscious integration allows individuals to channel the shadow's energy in constructive ways without being overtaken by it. Part 19. Anima and Animus. Carl Jung identified that each person carries within them an unconscious counterpart to their conscious gender identity, an inner opposite that acts as a bridge between the conscious mind and the unconscious. In men, this inner feminine presence is known as the anima, while in women, the corresponding unconscious masculine presence is called the animus. These inner figures go far beyond mere cultural notions of masculinity and femininity. They symbolize latent psychological traits, emotional depths, and spiritual capacities that balance and complete the conscious personality. Embracing and integrating these contrasexual archetypes is vital for achieving psychological wholeness and forming meaningful, mature relationships, both with others and within oneself. In men, the anima often expresses qualities that have been undervalued or underdeveloped due to societal emphasis on rationality, competition, and emotional restraint. She typically emerges as an inner presence with emotional sensitivity, intuitive insight, and relational depth. In dreams, she may appear as an enigmatic woman, a temptress, or a guiding spiritual figure, urging the man toward deeper emotional awareness and connection with his inner world. If the anima remains unconscious, a man may unconsciously project her onto the women he encounters, seeking from them the emotional richness and spiritual meaning he has not cultivated within himself. This can result in distorted expectations and relational difficulties, as no actual woman can embody the full scope of a man's unacknowledged inner life. For women, the animus represents qualities like logic, assertiveness, and spiritual leadership, traits often suppressed by traditional feminine conditioning, which tends to favor emotional openness and relational attunement. In dreams, he may appear as a strong male figure, a teacher, or a warrior, symbolizing intellectual clarity, firm conviction, and the capacity for independent action. When the animus is not made conscious, A woman may become dominated by inflexible thinking, argumentative behavior, or a tendency to intellectualize emotional experiences. Alternatively, she may project the animus onto men, seeking in them the mental stimulation or moral authority that she has yet to cultivate internally. Jung referred to this process of projection as a form of participation mystique, a psychological merging in which the individual loses a clear sense of self and becomes unconsciously entangled with another. Under the spell of such projections, people may experience powerful infatuation, idolization, or emotional dependence, often unrelated to the actual character of the other person. These idealized projections frequently result in intense relational turmoil once the other inevitably fails to meet impossible expectations. As the projection begins to dissolve, the individual starts to see the other more clearly, often leading to disillusionment or conflict. Understanding this dynamic helps illuminate why romantic relationships can begin with overwhelming passion and gradually settle into more grounded, yet sometimes disappointing, realities. True integration of the anima and animus involves engaging these inner figures with conscious intention. This can be achieved through practices such as dream analysis, active imagination, and intentionally reclaiming the qualities that have been projected onto others. As men develop their relationship with the anima, they often become more emotionally expressive, imaginative, and spiritually attuned without sacrificing their core masculinity. Likewise, as women integrate their animus, they gain greater intellectual self-assurance, assertiveness, and inner authority, while continuing to embody emotional wisdom and relational sensitivity. Jung emphasized that this process does not erase the natural distinctions between masculine and feminine energies. Rather, it fosters more complete individuals who can fluidly access both sets of qualities as needed throughout life. Part 20. Cultural Psychology, Social Dynamics, and Collective Behavior. Carl Jung's exploration of the human psyche naturally led him to extend his theories beyond the individual, delving into the psychological mechanisms that influence group dynamics, cultural systems, and the forces that shape collective behavior. He proposed that the archetypal structures guiding personal development also function on broader social and cultural levels, giving rise to commonly shared myths, social norms, and collective behaviors that form the foundation of group identities and coordinated social actions. Jung argued that societies, much like individuals, possess both a conscious dimension, reflected in their overt values, and an unconscious one, known as the collective shadow. To fully grasp societal tensions, political upheavals, and transformations in cultural identity, it is essential to understand these deeper group-level psychological dynamics. Through his study of collective psychology, Jung provided a conceptual bridge linking individual mental health to the well-being of the larger community and cultural context. The idea of the collective shadow offers profound insight into widespread social issues such as prejudice, scapegoating, and intergroup hostility. Just as individuals displace unwanted aspects of themselves onto others, entire communities may unconsciously externalize their disowned traits onto other groups, be it different races, religions, political ideologies, or nations. This group-level projection serves to preserve a positive self-image by placing all perceived negativity onto an outside group, designated as the other or the enemy. Jung noted that these projections intensify during periods of uncertainty or crisis, when people are most vulnerable to simplistic explanations for multifaceted issues and are eager to find tangible targets for their anxieties and grievances. Jung's examination of mass psychology and political movements highlighted how deeply rooted archetypal forces can be collectively activated and, at times, manipulated. Political leaders who achieve wide influence often do so by embodying or channeling archetypal figures, such as the protective father, heroic savior, or wise ruler, that resonate deeply with the unconscious needs and fantasies of the public. When these archetypes are unconsciously triggered across a population, people may act in ways that would be unthinkable to them as individuals, driven by powerful emotional currents rather than rational thought. His study of the rise of Nazism in Germany illustrated how collective psychological regression can take hold when rational awareness is submerged beneath primal, archetypal energies that offer illusory solutions to complex socioeconomic problems. A key element in this process is what Jung called participation mystique, a phenomenon in which individuals become so immersed in the group psyche that personal boundaries dissolve, giving rise to a kind of psychological fusion. This unconscious merging can serve a dual purpose. It can inspire creativity, solidarity, and a sense of shared mission, or it can erode independent thought and moral accountability, leading to mob behavior and large-scale destructive actions. Jung emphasized that when people become overly identified with the collective, they often surrender their personal values and critical thinking, allowing group emotions and ideologies to dominate their inner lives. While this psychological unification can foster strong, effective communities and cooperative teams, it can just as easily devolve into dangerous forms of collective behavior, especially when shadow projections and unconscious archetypal forces take control. By studying participation mystique, we gain insight into both the enormous creative potential and the profound psychological hazards that exist within all collective human activity. Jung maintained that just as personal development involves becoming aware of and integrating one's own shadow, the evolution of cultures requires a similar process. Societies must learn to acknowledge and work through their collective shadows rather than projecting them outward onto perceived enemies. Furthermore, they must cultivate the ability to embrace complexity and ambiguity, resisting the lure of oversimplified narratives and black and white thinking when addressing social challenges. Achieving this level of cultural maturity depends on the presence of psychologically developed individuals, those capable of maintaining self-awareness and critical judgment even amid collective pressure. These individuals are crucial for ensuring that group participation remains constructive and does not devolve into blind conformity or destructive mass behavior. In Jung's view, the advancement of culture hinges on the emergence of such conscious individuals, people who have faced their own inner darkness and established a grounded, authentic sense of self. Only they can guide their communities through the psychological complexities of collective life, helping to avoid the perils of archetypal domination and shadow projection. Part 21. The Red Book and Liber Novus. Carl Jung's personal psychological crisis between 1913 and 1930 stands as one of the most profound instances of self-exploration and introspection in the history of psychology. Following his dramatic and painful separation from Sigmund Freud, Jung entered what he would later call a confrontation with the unconscious, a period marked by inner chaos and deep psychological upheaval. Instead of seeking external guidance or withdrawing from his distress, Jung made the daring choice to confront his inner world directly. He initiated a methodical engagement with the contents of his unconscious, a technique he would later define as active imagination. This inward journey, fraught with emotional and psychological risk, became the experiential groundwork for nearly all of Jung's future theoretical contributions to the study of the psyche and the nature of consciousness. The work that emerged from this inner odyssey is known as the Red Book, originally titled Liber Novus, or New Book. Within its pages, Jung documented his visionary encounters with a range of autonomous figures from his unconscious mind. personalities such as Philemon, Salome, and Elijah. These inner characters appeared to possess a life and wisdom of their own, independent from Jung's conscious self. Jung held extended, often intense dialogues with these inner beings, questioning them about reality, the nature of the psyche, and the meaning of human existence. He meticulously recorded these exchanges, which frequently upended his previous rational assumptions and forced him to engage with elements of experience that defied the boundaries of scientific materialism. These figures acted as inner mentors, guiding him through the dangerous and disorienting terrain of the unconscious, while helping him maintain enough psychological stability to integrate what he discovered. Jung's technique involved entering a meditative state of focused receptivity, during which spontaneous images and scenarios would rise from the depths of his unconscious. He treated these visions with the same seriousness as external reality, interacting with them as though they were genuine beings possessing their own intentions and perspectives. Often, Jung began by asking these inner figures direct questions, patiently awaiting their responses. The answers he received frequently astonished him with their depth and insight, offering perspectives his conscious intellect could not have produced. This led Jung to conclude that these figures represented real, autonomous components of the psyche rather than mere inventions of fantasy or imagination. The process demanded immense psychological bravery. Jung never knew what disturbing images or difficult truths might surface from his inner world. The Red Book captures not only his dialogues with these unconscious entities, but also includes his vivid artistic representations of the visions he experienced. Jung painstakingly created a richly illustrated manuscript filled with detailed paintings, symbolic imagery, and elaborate calligraphy, each element designed to express the emotional and symbolic layers of his inner journey. These artistic works served a dual purpose. They acted as both a record of his psychological descent and as tools for deepening his engagement with the unconscious through the practice of active imagination. Together, Jung's narrative and visual work in the Red Book form a complete chronicle of his individuation process, the inner transformation that later became the foundation for many of his most influential ideas, including archetypes, psychological types, and the structure of the unconscious mind. Despite its significance, Jung kept the Red Book hidden from the public during his lifetime, allowing only a handful of trusted colleagues to see it. He feared that disclosing the full scope of his inner experiences might damage his reputation as a scientist and lead others to dismiss his psychological theories. It wasn't until 2009, almost 5 decades after his death, that the Red Book was finally published, revealing the deeply personal and visionary material that had informed the birth of analytical psychology. This extraordinary work makes it clear that Jung's psychological theories were not born of abstract speculation, but arose from a direct and courageous engagement with the unconscious. The Red Book stands as powerful evidence that the unconscious is not merely a theoretical construct, but a living reality with which the conscious mind can enter into meaningful dialogue. Part 22. UFOs as Psychological Phenomena. In his compelling work, Flying Saucers, A Modern Myth of Things Seen in the Skies, Carl Jung explores UFOs not as physical spacecraft, but as profound psychological symbols that emerge during times of collective upheaval and transformation. Rather than debating the reality of extraterrestrial visitors, Jung focused on why large numbers of people were experiencing and describing strikingly similar visions of glowing circular objects in the sky. Jung noted that reports of UFO sightings tend to spike during moments of widespread social instability and anxiety. This pattern led him to theorize that such sightings are not literal observations, but rather projections of unconscious content onto the external world. Psychological imagery given form in the heavens. His examination revealed that UFO encounters often carry symbolic weight akin to that found in religious visions or archetypal dreams. These experiences seem to stem from the same deep psychological layers responsible for spiritual revelation and personal transformation. Jung was especially struck by the round shape of most UFOs, which echoed the mandala, a powerful symbol in many traditions representing unity, wholeness, and the self-archetype. He had long observed that individuals undergoing significant interchange frequently create or are drawn to circular forms, interpreting them as expressions of an emerging sense of integration and completeness. From this, Jung proposed that the modern fixation with UFOs could reflect a collective projection of the self-archetype onto the sky, particularly in an era yearning for unity, coherence, and transcendence. Moreover, the radiant quality of these unidentified flying objects tied them to traditional symbols of divine light, often found in depictions of spiritual illumination. This luminous aspect implied a numinous significance, a spiritual resonance speaking to the human longing for connection with something beyond the material world. Jung pointed out that those who reported close encounters with UFOs were often individuals in the midst of psychological or existential crises, paralleling the conditions under which religious visions or mystical experiences tend to occur. Many witnesses describe profound emotional responses, awe, fear, reverence, feelings akin to those reported in encounters with the divine or with the archetypal unconscious. He further noted that accounts of alien abduction frequently mirrored traditional shamanic initiation narratives. These tales often involve journeys into otherworldly realms, contact with non-human intelligences, and the receipt of special knowledge or personal transformation. For Jung, such similarities suggested that UFO encounters might represent a contemporary form of visionary experience, fulfilling the same psychological needs that ancient myths and religious encounters once did. The technological design of UFOs, with their sleek machinery and otherworldly capabilities, reflected the modern cultural backdrop in which these archetypal images were manifesting. Jung understood that archetypes always express themselves through symbols that are relevant and resonant within their cultural and historical moment. In a world dominated by science and technology, it made sense that transcendent experiences would adopt a technological guise rather than a religious one. In this light, UFOs function as a symbolic bridge between the cold logic of scientific materialism and the timeless human desire for mystery, meaning, and connection to forces beyond the self. They stand as modern myths, blending the rational and the mystical, giving expression to psychological needs that science alone cannot fulfill. Jung's interpretation of the UFO phenomenon reflects his broader understanding that psychological projections tend to intensify during periods of collective stress, particularly when the prevailing cultural symbols and institutions no longer offer adequate meaning or guidance. The period following World War II, marked by the advent of nuclear weapons, astonishing technological advances, and rapid societal shifts, generated widespread existential fear and uncertainty. In this context, UFOs became a medium through which the collective unconscious expressed both its dread of self-destruction and its yearning for deliverance, perhaps by wiser, more advanced beings capable of showing a path beyond humanity's current limitations. To Jung, the rise of the UFO mythos signaled a deeper psychological need, the longing for new symbols and narratives that could help humanity cope with the immense psychological strain of the modern technological age, and preserve a link to the deeper, spiritual dimensions of existence that rational thought alone cannot satisfy. Part 23. The Cenex and Poor Archetypes. The archetypal contrast between the Cenex and the puer represents one of the most profound psychological polarities identified by Carl Jung. This dynamic captures the perpetual tension between age and youth, tradition and innovation, structure and spontaneity, forces that shape both individual psychological development and the evolution of cultures. The puer aeternus, or eternal youth, symbolizes the aspect of human nature that remains endlessly young, imaginative, and full of potential. This archetype thrives on inspiration and limitless possibility, but often finds difficulty in accepting boundaries, committing to responsibilities, or meeting the demands of adult life. On the other hand, the Cenex, or wise old man, represents maturity, wisdom, structure, and foresight. While it provides stability and long-term vision, it can also become inflexible, overly cautious, and resistant to progress or change. Recognizing the interplay between these two archetypes is essential for navigating major life changes, sustaining creative pursuits, and managing the ongoing balance between freedom and accountability, challenges faced by both individuals and societies alike. The puer archetype often emerges in people who exhibit a childlike wonder toward life, extraordinary creativity, and the ability to uplift others with their idealism. Individuals dominated by this energy may be highly gifted, visionary, and charismatic, frequently seeing beyond conventional boundaries and imagining entirely new ways of living or creating. However, the shadow side of the puer is marked by a fear of commitment, a tendency to abandon projects once they lose their novelty, and an aversion to the hard work required to turn inspiration into reality. Those embodying the puer may also grapple with addictive tendencies, unstable relationships, or chronic dissatisfaction, always chasing ideal experiences that fail to match the perfection of their inner fantasies, resulting in disillusionment when reality inevitably falls short. In contrast, the Cenex offers grounding qualities, maturity, discipline, and the ability to construct enduring institutions and frameworks that uphold cultural values across generations. People guided by this archetype often excel in strategic planning, long-term vision, and the patient mastery needed to build meaningful legacies. They frequently take on roles as educators, mentors, or cultural stewards, helping younger generations avoid repeating past mistakes and encouraging them to build on the foundations laid before them. Yet, the darker side of the Cenex can manifest as excessive rigidity, cynicism, and resistance to change. This can result in a stifling of youthful creativity and the suppression of innovation through hypercritical judgment or unattainable standards. Jung emphasized that psychological maturity depends not on exclusive identification with either archetype, but on their integration. A well-balanced individual retains the puer's imaginative spark and openness to the new, while also cultivating the Cenex's discernment, discipline, and ability to commit over time. This integrated perspective becomes particularly vital during midlife, when individuals often confront the need to reconcile their youthful aspirations with the wisdom gained through experience. The inner dialogue between puer and Cenex can foster innovation that blends creative vision with practical execution, sidestepping the puer's escapism and the Cenex's stagnation. On a collective level, the puer-Cenex dynamic also unfolds in cultural and generational contexts, where it fuels the ongoing tension between progressive change and the preservation of tradition. Societies require the forward-pushing energy of the puer to challenge outdated norms and imagine new futures, just as they depend on the Cenex to uphold enduring values and maintain social cohesion. Generational clashes often mirror this archetypal struggle. Younger people push for transformation, while older generations seek to protect the hard-earned lessons and structures of the past. Recognizing this deeper symbolic pattern can help shift such conflicts from personal antagonism to mutual understanding, paving the way for more constructive dialogue across generations. Ultimately, both innovation and tradition are essential to the growth and sustainability of individuals and societies. Embracing the dynamic between the poor and the Cenex allows for a more holistic approach to development, one that honors the vitality of the new without discarding the wisdom of the old. Part 24. The Psychoid Archetype and the Unity of Mind and Matter. Carl Jung's idea of the Psychoid archetype stands as one of his most profound and forward-thinking contributions to the exploration of the relationship between consciousness and the physical world. In the later stages of his career, Jung began to propose that archetypes were not confined solely to the realm of the psyche, but could also function as foundational principles shaping both mental experiences and material reality. This groundbreaking insight implied that the recurring symbolic patterns he identified in dreams, myths, and psychological development might mirror universal structural forces governing the behavior of matter and energy. Jung's formulation of the psychoid archetype anticipated modern discussions that seek to bridge the gap between consciousness studies and quantum physics, raising the possibility that both mind and matter arise from a shared, more fundamental substratum of existence. Jung's fascination with the interrelation between psyche and matter was deepened through his collaboration with the renowned physicist Wolfgang Pauli. Together, they delved into the phenomenon of synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that appear to defy causal explanation. Their extensive dialogue and theoretical exploration centered on the idea that mental and physical events could be interlinked by deeper patterns that transcend the usual boundaries, separating subjective experience from objective reality. They noted that quantum mechanics introduced anomalies suggesting that the observer's consciousness could be entangled with the behavior of particles, thus challenging the materialist view that mind and matter are wholly separate. These observations led Jung to question whether the archetypes he studied in the human psyche were in fact the same ordering forces that give rise to structure and coherence in the physical universe. The psychoid hypothesis posits that archetypes reside in a domain that is neither entirely psychological nor purely physical, a kind of neutral ground where the mental and material intersect. In this psychophysical domain, archetypes can manifest as inner psychological symbols when experienced by a conscious mind, or as physical patterns when expressed through the fabric of matter and energy. Such a model helps to explain why archetypal motifs appear not only in dreams and mythology, but also in natural structures, such as the geometry of crystals, the organization of biological systems, and the mathematical harmonies underlying physical laws. Jung speculated that what we call consciousness and what we call matter may be different expressions of the same archetypal foundation, two lenses through which we observe a singular, unified reality. This holistic perspective offers a potential resolution to the long-standing divide between scientific materialism and spiritual or psychological worldviews. Rather than treating these domains as fundamentally opposed, Jung's approach suggests they are complementary reflections of one deeper order of existence. The implications of this theory are especially significant in understanding synchronicity, those uncanny moments when outer events align meaningfully with inner psychological states. If archetypes truly operate across both mental and physical planes, then synchronistic experiences can be seen as glimpses into the underlying unity of all things, a momentary revelation of the shared structure binding consciousness and the external world. This would account for the striking symbolic resonance often observed in synchronistic events, where the outer circumstance seems to mirror the inner condition of the individual. Rather than dismissing these occurrences as mere coincidence or psychological projection, the psychoid archetype theory proposes they reveal genuine correspondences between the inner and outer realms. In recent decades, contemporary fields such as quantum field theory, systems theory, consciousness research, and morphic resonance have explored ideas strikingly aligned with Jung's concept. These disciplines increasingly recognize that pattern, form, and organization may be more fundamental to reality than matter or mind considered in isolation. Jung's notion of the psychoid archetype thus offers a powerful psychological framework for interpreting these emerging insights. It provides a model in which scientific discovery and inner experience are not mutually exclusive, but are instead reflections of the same organizing principles that govern the cosmos. Ultimately, this integrative vision holds the promise of a more comprehensive understanding of reality, one that respects both empirical knowledge and the wisdom of the human psyche, while acknowledging their shared origin in the deeper patterns that shape all existence. Part 25. The Symbolic Life. Carl Jung's concept of the symbolic life reflects the culmination of his insights into how modern individuals can remain connected to deeper sources of meaning and wisdom in a world increasingly dominated by logic, technology, and material pursuits. He noted that contemporary culture has become largely estranged from symbolic thinking, the ability to perceive and engage with patterns that link personal experience to broader spiritual and cosmic realities. Jung proposed that to live symbolically is to stay attuned to the underlying significance within everyday events. Rather than viewing life through a purely functional lens, this approach invites us to see ordinary experiences as reflections of timeless archetypes and universal human narratives. By adopting this symbolic mindset, individuals can remain grounded in the sacred and the transcendent, even while fully engaging in the demands of the rational world. A key aspect of Jung's teaching was his distinction between signs and symbols. Signs, he explained, serve to convey known information in direct, unambiguous terms. Symbols, by contrast, point toward realities that lie beyond the limits of direct comprehension, mysteries that can only be accessed through metaphor, paradox, and intuitive insight. To live symbolically is to recognize when a moment or image holds more than its literal content, serving as a gateway to deeper understanding. Such a way of seeing requires what Jung called a symbolic attitude, a mode of perception that welcomes complexity, depth, and layered meaning. This attitude resists the impulse to reduce everything to logic or utility, and instead cultivates receptivity to the unconscious and the numinous. The symbolic life invites us to pay close attention to dreams, synchronicities, and inner images, which often offer wisdom that rational thought alone cannot reach. Jung urged individuals to nurture this connection through personal practices that honor the symbolic dimension of life. This could take many forms: maintaining a dream journal, engaging in creative expression, spending reflective time in nature, or participating in spiritual or contemplative rituals that open the heart to mystery. The point is not to reject reason, but to enrich it by embracing forms of knowing that transcend analysis. He warned that those who lose touch with the symbolic realm often suffer from what he termed spiritual impoverishment, a profound sense of emptiness and lack of purpose that no amount of achievement or intellectual clarity can resolve. In the absence of symbolic meaning, life tends to collapse into routine, utility, and a numbing preoccupation with surface concerns, leaving the deeper human needs for meaning, transcendence, and connection unmet. By contrast, the symbolic life offers a remedy for this existential emptiness. It helps individuals perceive the sacred woven into daily existence and maintain a relationship with enduring patterns that infuse life with purpose and direction. This approach does not demand allegiance to any specific religious belief. Rather, it encourages a spirit of awe and humility in the face of life's mystery and complexity. To live symbolically is also to understand one's personal journey as part of a larger narrative. Struggles in love, for example, may be seen as part of the timeless dynamic between freedom and commitment. Challenges at work may be interpreted through the lens of the hero's journey, a quest to uncover authentic calling and inner purpose. This symbolic framing transforms suffering into something meaningful, offering guidance and reassurance that hardship is not senseless, but part of a deeper unfolding. Ultimately, the symbolic life represents a way of being that honors both logical reasoning and intuitive knowing. It encourages a posture of openness to wonder and mystery, sustaining a sense of meaning even amidst life's trials and uncertainties. In Jung's vision, this path reconnects us to what is eternal and essential in the human experience, and makes life not only bearable but deeply worthwhile. Part 26. Psychological Types in Relationships and Teams. Jung's system of psychological typology offers profound insights into how different personality types interact, shedding light on relationship dynamics, team performance, and the roots of both synergy and conflict. Each type contributes its own set of strengths and viewpoints, enriching interpersonal and professional connections. However, these very differences can lead to friction and confusion when individuals fail to recognize the legitimacy of behaviors and preferences unlike their own. A deeper understanding of type dynamics reveals why similar relationship patterns tend to repeat across different partnerships, and why some teams function harmoniously while others are plagued by recurring miscommunication and interpersonal strain. Recognizing the nature of psychological types can turn what might otherwise be sources of tension into opportunities for mutual development. By consciously valuing the distinct contributions of various personality types, people can improve their effectiveness and deepen their connections. In romantic relationships, the differences in psychological types often play a dual role, initially fueling attraction, but later presenting challenges that couples must learn to navigate. Opposites frequently find themselves drawn together because each partner often possesses qualities the other lacks or hasn't fully developed. This dynamic can foster personal growth and a sense of completeness within the relationship. For instance, an introverted thinking type may feel captivated by an extroverted feeling type, who brings emotional warmth and social fluidity to their world. In return, the extroverted partner may benefit from the logical structure and objective clarity offered by their introverted counterpart. Nevertheless, these differences can just as easily become points of contention, especially when one partner expects the other to fundamentally change who they are, or interprets type-based behavior as personal criticism or emotional detachment. Long-term success in such relationships often depends on cultivating what Jung described as psychological generosity, the willingness to affirm and support a partner's natural tendencies, even when those tendencies sharply contrast with one's own. This calls for developing communication strategies that honor each partner's type, rather than pushing for change that feels unnatural or forced. For example, introverts often need solitude and time to internally process their thoughts and emotions before making decisions, while extroverts tend to thrive through conversation and active engagement with others. When couples understand and respect these fundamental differences, they can create relationship dynamics that meet both partners' needs, rather than forcing compromises that leave each person feeling only partially satisfied. In team environments, Psychological diversity is equally essential to ensure that all vital perspectives and cognitive functions are present during decision-making and problem-solving. Highly functional teams often balance thinkers who provide detached, logical analysis with feelers who focus on values and the human side of outcomes. Similarly, effective teams include sensing types who focus on concrete details and intuitive types who bring visionary thinking and innovative ideas to the table. By contrast, teams composed of overly similar personalities may perform well in specific domains but are vulnerable to collective blind spots. These gaps can result in flawed decisions and missed opportunities. An awareness of psychological type dynamics allows team leaders to assign roles more strategically, ensure that all voices are heard, and prevent conflicts driven by misinterpretation of personality traits rather than actual disagreement on goals or priorities. However, applying this understanding effectively requires moving beyond mere labeling. True type awareness involves appreciating the unique contributions each personality brings, while resisting the temptation to use typology as a justification for stagnation or avoidance of growth. By leveraging this knowledge, individuals can pinpoint areas where support from others is beneficial and identify aspects of themselves that need further development. This mindful engagement with typology fosters more conscious, collaborative relationships, where differences serve as sources of mutual enrichment rather than triggers for misunderstanding or conflict. Whether in personal partnerships or professional teams, those who embrace and integrate the principles of psychological type awareness frequently report stronger communication, fewer conflicts, and greater creative synergy, as they learn to harness the power of their psychological differences instead of resisting them. Rather than viewing these differences as barriers, they come to see them as integral elements that strengthen the team or partnership as a whole. Part 27. Legacy, Modern Applications, and Integration. Carl Jung's enduring impact on psychology, psychotherapy, and our understanding of the human psyche stretches well beyond his original theories, continuing to grow through modern research and practical application. His seminal ideas on the unconscious mind, psychological typologies, archetypal patterns, and the process of individuation have found their way into diverse disciplines, influencing therapeutic practices, educational frameworks, and organizational development strategies across the globe. Today's Jungian analysts expand upon his foundational work, integrating it with advances in neuroscience, trauma studies, and multicultural perspectives. This ongoing evolution highlights the lasting relevance and flexibility of Jung's insights into the nature of psychological growth and transformation. Jung's focus on meaning-making, spiritual depth, and holistic healing offered a compelling counterpoint to strictly medical or behaviorist models of mental health. His theories have inspired alternative paths towards psychological well-being, ones that honor the full richness and complexity of the human experience. Instruments like the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, MBTI, and other typology-based tools have brought his theory of psychological types into mainstream use, helping millions of individuals in fields such as business, education, and personal development better understand themselves and others. Although such tools may at times oversimplify Jung's intricate typological framework, they have nonetheless played a pivotal role in promoting appreciation for personality diversity. They encourage clearer communication and collaboration by illuminating the varied ways people think, feel, and engage with the world. Modern developments in type theory have expanded Jung's original ideas to incorporate cross-cultural dimensions, developmental dynamics, and situational variability, offering a more refined and inclusive perspective on how personality manifests in both personal and professional contexts. The widespread adoption of typological thinking has helped normalize psychological diversity, reducing the tendency to view natural differences in cognition and decision-making as pathological. Jung's explorations into trauma, psychological complexes, and the symbolic nature of symptoms have deeply informed contemporary approaches to trauma therapy, family systems work, and other integrative modalities. His view that symptoms often carry meaningful psychological content and serve adaptive roles has led to more collaborative, client-centered therapeutic relationships that honor the individual's inner wisdom and innate capacity for healing. Many therapists today incorporate Jungian methods such as active imagination, dream analysis, and expressive creativity into their practices. These approaches provide access to psychological material that may be difficult to reach through conventional talk therapy or cognitive techniques alone. Jung's perspective on therapy as a space for mutual transformation has significantly influenced relational and humanistic psychotherapies, where authentic human connection is valued above mere technical application. In the broader arena, Jungian psychology has found applications in leadership development, organizational change, and social transformation efforts. By understanding archetypal dynamics, shadow projection, and collective complexes, leaders and changemakers can navigate resistance and foster meaningful innovation in group settings. Insights from Jungian thought have become increasingly relevant in fields like environmental psychology, conflict mediation, and social justice, where unconscious influences on collective behavior must be acknowledged and integrated to support constructive societal change. The rising interest in mindfulness, spiritual inquiry, and holistic development further reflects Jung's early recognition that purely materialistic or rational paradigms are insufficient to address the deeper existential needs of humanity. Perhaps his most profound contribution lies in demonstrating that psychology can uphold both scientific integrity and a reverence for mystery, uniting empirical study with mythic understanding, clinical practice with spiritual insight, and individual transformation with collective evolution. Jung's vision created a far-reaching and integrative model of the human psyche, one that remains remarkably relevant amid today's complex global challenges. As we confront crises that demand both technological ingenuity and psychological maturity, his emphasis on developing consciousness, integrating the shadow, and finding personal and collective meaning offers essential guidance. Ultimately, Jung's concept of individuation, understood not just as personal fulfillment but as a contribution to the collective evolution of humanity, continues to inspire hope. It reminds us that individual psychological growth is not isolated from the world, but can actively shape a more conscious, compassionate, and integrated human society. Part 28. Synchronicity. Synchronicity stands as one of Carl Jung's most enigmatic and debated insights. His exploration into the phenomenon of meaningful coincidences and the unseen threads that weave together inner psychological experiences with external physical events. Jung describes synchronicity as the occurrence of significant coincidences between internal states and external happenings that defy explanation through conventional cause and effect reasoning. These experiences frequently arise during pivotal moments of emotional or psychological upheaval, times when individuals are facing transformative decisions or undergoing profound internal change. Jung argued that such moments reveal a deeper, organizing intelligence within the cosmos, an intelligence that connects mind and matter in ways that exceed our normal perceptions of reality. Jung's fascination with synchronicity emerged from his therapeutic work, where he noticed that patients often reported uncanny coincidences that seemed to mirror their inner psychological processes. For example, Someone wrestling with issues of trust might find themselves repeatedly meeting strangers who unexpectedly share deeply personal stories. Likewise, a person confronting their own shadow aspects may start to notice recurring themes of darkness or crime surfacing in books, conversations, or media around them. Such coincidences often carry symbolic resonance, echoing the psychological landscape of the individual. It can feel as though the outer world is actively responding to, or reflecting, their internal state. Although Jung was initially skeptical and considered these occurrences to be random, he eventually came to see them as a unique and significant phenomenon, one that warranted rigorous attention. The idea of synchronicity directly challenges the prevailing Western scientific model, which insists that all events must be linked through clear, mechanical causality. In contrast, Jung introduced the notion of an acausal connecting principle, a concept that posits that events can be connected not by direct cause and effect, but through shared meaning. This acausal principle operates much like the archetypes in the collective unconscious. It forges connections that are rich in symbolic significance and transcend the usual separation between inner experience and external reality. Jung proposed that both consciousness and the material world might be dual expressions of a deeper, unified reality, one that occasionally discloses itself through synchronistic events that bind subjective awareness to objective occurrences. Jung also observed that these meaningful coincidences often intensify during periods when individuals are more receptive to the unconscious and its archetypal influences. Those undergoing deep psychological analysis, artists immersed in important creative work, or people navigating major life crossroads frequently report a surge in synchronicities. These experiences often seem to offer insight, affirmation, or caution regarding their life's direction. Such moments can feel like communications from a wiser, hidden intelligence, one that perceives a broader perspective on a person's journey than their conscious self can grasp. Jung was clear that synchronicity is not something that can be summoned or manufactured at will. Instead, it arises spontaneously when internal and external conditions align to allow for these meaningful encounters. The real value of synchronicity lies not in its potential to predict the future or exert control, but in its ability to provide meaning, perspective, and guidance, especially in times of uncertainty or change. When people learn to notice and honor synchronistic events, they often discover a deeper connection to greater patterns of significance that surpass their individual circumstances. This sense of alignment can bring reassurance during difficult times, and it encourages a trust in life's unfolding, even when logic and reason offer no clear path forward. For Jung, paying attention to synchronicity was part of cultivating what he called a religious attitude toward life, an openness to the presence of mystery, depth, and meaning beyond what the rational mind can fully comprehend or control. Part 29. Alchemy and Psychology. Carl Jung's in-depth exploration of medieval alchemy gave him a profound symbolic framework for articulating psychological transformation and the process of individuation, concepts he found difficult to convey through the language of conventional psychology. After years of struggling to express the dynamics of inner development, Jung realized that alchemical texts contained rich symbolic descriptions that closely mirrored the transformative psychological experiences he had observed in his patients as well as in himself. He saw in the alchemist's goal of turning base metals into gold a powerful metaphor for the transformation of unconscious material into conscious insight. This symbolic alchemical process paralleled the psychological integration of disparate elements into what Jung referred to as the self, a unified and whole personality. This insight offered Jung not only validation for his theories, but also a structured symbolic system that helped elucidate the stages and challenges inherent in psychological growth. Alchemical imagery depicted transformation as a sequence of operations, dissolution, purification, and reconstitution that reflected the unfolding of inner development. The first of these stages, known as the nigredo or blackening, signified an encounter with the shadow aspects of the psyche and the collapse of outdated or restrictive psychological frameworks. This stage, often marked by confusion, depression, and the disintegration of a previously stable identity, was understood by Jung as a necessary and fertile crisis, a precursor to renewal and psychological rebirth. Following the darkness of the nigredo is the albedo, or whitening, which represents the clarification of consciousness and the integration of refined psychological contents. This is succeeded by the rubedo, or reddening, which symbolizes the culmination of the transformation, the emergence of psychological wholeness, and the realization of the self. Jung found that alchemical literature provided intricate symbolic instructions for navigating the inner conflicts, tensions, and paradoxes that define the individuation journey. One of the central themes in alchemy, the union of opposites, often depicted as the sacred marriage of king and queen or the image of the hermaphrodite, resonated with Jung's idea of integrating opposing aspects of the personality, masculine and feminine, conscious and unconscious, spiritual and material. The alchemist's emphasis on careful, patient work and gradual transformation reinforced Jung's conviction that authentic psychological development is a slow and deliberate process. He opposed the notion of quick psychological fixes, advocating instead for an approach that honors the organic unfolding of the psyche. The obscure and symbolic nature of alchemical procedures validated Jung's observation that transformation often involves forces that resist purely rational explanation or control. Through his study of alchemy, Jung came to see that the human concern with psychological transformation has deep historical roots. Even when expressed through the cryptic language of alchemical symbols, the underlying process remained recognizably psychological. Alchemical experiments, though conducted in physical laboratories, served as external projections of inner psychological work. The substances and procedures acted as metaphors for unconscious dynamics being explored and integrated. Jung also noted that many mystical, religious, and esoteric traditions across cultures have employed similar symbolic languages to describe the path of inner transformation. This led him to conclude that the individuation process is not a modern invention, but a timeless and universal human experience. This historical continuity gave Jung confidence that his theories were not merely personal insights or culturally specific ideas, but reflections of deep, enduring truths about human nature. Furthermore, Jung's examination of alchemy highlighted the significance of what he called participation mystique, a profound psychological connection between the observer and the observed. Alchemists believed that the success of their work depended on their own inner state, recognizing that transformation was not just an external process, but one that demanded the involvement of the whole person. This realization paralleled Jung's belief in the transformative nature of the therapeutic relationship, where healing emerges not from detached analysis, but from mutual engagement and the active participation of both therapist and patient. For Jung, psychological insight was not achieved through objective observation alone, but through personal involvement and emotional resonance. In alchemy, Jung discovered a model of psychological inquiry that balanced the scientific quest for understanding with an acknowledgement of the mystical dimensions of transformation. This integrative approach honored both the measurable and the mysterious, affirming that some aspects of the psyche cannot be reduced to rational terms, and yet are no less real or essential for that. Part 30. Religious Experience, Spirituality, and the Psyche. Carl Jung's engagement with religion and spirituality stands as one of the most intricate and debated aspects of both his theoretical work and personal journey. Though he was born into a lineage of Protestant clergy, he struggled from an early age with traditional Christian teachings and sought a deeper, more psychologically resonant understanding of spiritual life. Throughout his career, Jung remained committed to exploring religious experience through the lens of psychology, seeking neither to pathologize it nor to dismiss it as mere fantasy or escapism. He made a clear distinction between formal, institutional religion and what he called religiosity, a deeply rooted psychological disposition that yearns for contact with transcendent meaning and values beyond the ego. To Jung, spiritual experience was not a symptom of regression or immaturity, but an essential dimension of human psychological growth. He frequently encountered patients whose suffering stemmed not from clinical pathology, but from what he identified as a spiritual crisis, a loss of meaning, direction, or connection to something greater than the self. In many such cases, Jung observed that individuals who underwent authentic spiritual awakenings or transformative experiences often achieved profound psychological healing, improvements that could not be accounted for by conventional therapeutic techniques alone. This led him to conclude that the human psyche has an innate orientation toward the sacred, or what he called the numinous, those powerful, mysterious experiences that evoke awe, reverence, and a sense of contact with ultimate reality. Jung contended that denying or neglecting this spiritual dimension results in psychological fragmentation and contributes to many emotional and mental disorders. To articulate the psychological structure underlying religious experience, he introduced the concept of the self-archetype, a central organizing symbol of wholeness and inner divinity. He noted that the imagery and feelings associated with the process of self-realization, such as unity, transcendence, and a sense of eternal meaning, are strikingly similar to those found in religious experience. Jung proposed that genuine encounters with the sacred often occur through direct engagement with this archetype of the self, which he saw as the inner representation of the divine, not an external deity, but a symbolic expression of the deepest aspects of human consciousness. This framework allowed Jung to affirm the value of religious experience without departing from a psychological mode of explanation. Rather than interpreting religious phenomena as illusions or projections, he regarded them as meaningful expressions of the psyche's striving toward integration and coherence. Jung placed great importance on individual spiritual exploration, favoring personal experience over adherence to dogma or institutional authority. He urged people to cultivate their relationship with the sacred by attending to dreams, symbols, synchronicities, and the subtle messages of the unconscious mind, rather than relying solely on established religious systems. For Jung, true spiritual growth demanded the same rigorous inner work required by the process of individuation, the psychological journey toward wholeness. This included facing one's shadow, acknowledging inner contradictions, and confronting the limits of one's personality with honesty and humility. In contrast to religious traditions that often emphasize purity, moral perfection, or idealize self-improvement, Jung advocated for an acceptance of human complexity and the integration of all aspects of the self. His perspective on the psychological reality of spiritual life had significant implications not only for personal development but also for the practice of psychotherapy. Jung maintained that many psychological disturbances are, at their core, spiritual dilemmas, and that effective healing must engage the client's need for meaning, purpose, and connection with something beyond the ego. At the same time, he cautioned that spiritual pursuits, which ignore psychological truths, often result in dangerous pitfalls, such as inflation of the ego, unconscious projections, and various forms of spiritual bypassing. These distortions, he warned, masquerade as enlightenment, but actually deepen inner conflict and disconnection. By bringing together the realms of psychology and spirituality, Jung offered a path towards psychological wholeness that respects both scientific understanding and the profound human longing for transcendent meaning. His work continues to illuminate the ways in which inner development and spiritual insight can mutually inform and enrich one another. Part 31. Mythology, Fairy Tales, and Collective Symbols. Jung's exploration of mythology and fairy tales played a pivotal role in supporting his theory of the collective unconscious. Through this research, he uncovered recurring psychological themes that appear consistently in human narratives across diverse cultures and eras. Remarkably, he found that similar stories, motifs, and character archetypes emerge even in societies with no known historical contact, indicating that these patterns stem not from cultural exchange, but from shared inner structures of the human psyche. These recurring narratives function as symbolic roadmaps, offering insight into core human experiences such as coming of age, falling in love, facing adversity, and discovering one's sense of identity and purpose. Jung interpreted mythology and fairy tales as collective dreams, narratives created by the human spirit to preserve and convey psychological truths across generations. He was especially intrigued by fairy tales because they present archetypal themes in their most distilled and accessible form. Unlike mythologies, which often carry complex cultural and historical layers, fairy tales convey essential psychological patterns without excessive embellishment. Typically, these stories center on a young protagonist who leaves home, encounters various trials, receives aid from magical or supernatural beings, and ultimately undergoes a transformation that leads to wholeness and maturity. This basic structure reflects what Jung called the individuation process, the journey towards self-realization, and offers a symbolic framework for understanding the inner tasks and challenges that shape personal development. He noted that the symbolic language in fairy tales resonates deeply with the unconscious mind, often illuminating psychological dynamics that lie beyond the reach of conscious, rational thought. Jung's work on collective symbols revealed that archetypal images carry layered meanings, functioning simultaneously on personal, societal, and universal levels. Take the image of a tree, for example. To one individual, it may signify personal growth. To a culture, it might reflect values surrounding harmony with nature. And on a universal level, it represents the archetype of the axis mundi, the cosmic pillar connecting the earthly and the divine. Authentic symbols, Jung found, cannot be forced into existence or manufactured artificially. Instead, they emerge organically from the unconscious when conditions are ripe. These naturally occurring symbols possess what he termed a transcendent function, enabling a synthesis between conscious awareness and unconscious material, thus fostering psychological integration and transformation. Jung also recognized that many people in the modern world suffer from what he called symbolic impoverishment. In a society dominated by rationalism and materialism, symbolic thinking is often dismissed as outdated or irrational. As a result, individuals are frequently left without the symbolic tools necessary to navigate inner experiences and major life transitions. This loss contributes to a widespread sense of emptiness and alienation, and underlies many psychological disturbances and spiritual crises of the contemporary age. To counter this disconnection, Jung urged people to re-engage with the symbolic wisdom found in myths and fairy tales. At the same time, he emphasized the importance of remaining receptive to the emergence of new symbols, ones that may better suit the psychological needs of the present moment. Applying this wisdom in a practical way involves learning to recognize archetypal patterns within one's own life and using them as interpretive frameworks for personal growth. For instance, someone experiencing difficulty in a romantic relationship might draw insight from tales that explore the union of opposites, such as the story of Beauty and the Beast. Similarly, an individual grappling with career uncertainty might benefit from identifying with heroic quests that depict overcoming trials and discovering inner strengths. Importantly, Jung stressed that these stories are not meant to be taken literally. Instead, they serve as symbolic guides, psychological maps that offer clarity, encouragement, and perspective during times of struggle and transformation. By approaching personal challenges through this archetypal lens, individuals can begin to see their experiences as part of a broader human narrative. The collective myths and symbols of humanity, Jung believed, carry enduring wisdom that can illuminate and support each person's unique journey toward wholeness. In Part 32, Art, Creativity, and Mandala Symbolism, Jung delves into the profound psychological significance of artistic expression, recognizing it as an essential pathway for personal development and a means of articulating unconscious material that lies beyond the reach of logical discourse. He observed that creativity originates from the same psychic depths responsible for producing dreams and neurotic symptoms. But, unlike these, it can transmute unsettling unconscious material into forms that the conscious mind can understand, appreciate, and integrate. Jung identified two primary forms of creative expression: psychological art, which emerges from personal experience and conveys individual meaning, and visionary art, which draws from archetypal themes rooted in the collective unconscious and resonates with universal human truths. While both serve important psychological roles, Jung was especially drawn to visionary art because of its power to unveil shared psychic processes and its potential to foretell broader cultural changes. Central to Jung's exploration of these themes was the mandala, a symbol that came to represent his understanding of psychic totality and the archetype of the self. His engagement with mandalas began during a time of deep personal turmoil following his separation from Freud, when he found himself instinctively sketching circular motifs. He realized that this spontaneous act of creating mandala-like images brought about a sense of inner order and facilitated the integration of fragmented aspects of the psyche. Over time, Jung observed that mandala imagery was not confined to his own experience. It appeared across religious traditions, cultural art forms, and the spontaneous creations of individuals undergoing psychological transformation. This cross-cultural recurrence pointed to the mandala as an archetypal image, an innate pattern that organizes the psyche around a stable center. Jung found that individuals engaged in inner work toward self-integration often produce mandala-like designs naturally. The circular structure of the mandala creates a symbolic container where oppositional forces can coexist in balanced relation without the destructive friction of unresolved inner conflict. At the center of the mandala, symbols often emerge that signify the self or a divine essence, while the outer elements reflect diverse psychological contents arranged in ordered harmony around that core. The practice of creating mandalas can therefore serve a dual purpose: as a diagnostic lens for assessing one's current psychic state, and as a therapeutic exercise that fosters psychological cohesion and inner healing. Jung saw artistic creation not merely as a form of craftsmanship or amusement, but as a deeply meaningful psychological function. He discovered that genuine creative expression requires the ego to relinquish control, allowing the unconscious to speak through the medium of art. This intentional surrender to the creative process mirrors the dynamic relationship between the ego and the self that characterizes psychological maturity. Art making, in this sense, becomes a training ground for the development of inner balance and insight. It also offers a contained and relatively safe space to engage with aspects of the psyche, such as shadow elements and archetypal energies, that may otherwise feel too overwhelming to face directly. Through this process, such material can be gradually integrated. Jung emphasized that the psychological impact of creative expression is not determined by technical mastery or artistic finesse, but by the sincerity and emotional truth behind it. Spontaneous drawings, writings, or other expressive acts that arise from a real inner need often carry far more psychological weight than polished works created without genuine inner engagement. He encouraged everyone, not just professional artists, to engage in creative activity as part of their personal growth. For Jung, the drive to create is a basic human instinct, a natural function of the psyche that connects us with inner wisdom and the capacity for healing beyond the limits of rational thought. In this view, creativity is not a rare talent possessed by a select few, but an essential tool for inner development, available to anyone who is willing to listen to and act upon their authentic creative impulses. Part 33. Neurosis, Psychosis, and Mental Health. Carl Jung's approach to mental illness marked a significant departure from conventional medical frameworks. Rather than reducing psychological symptoms to mere biological malfunctions to be eradicated, Jung saw them as meaningful signals, expressions of inner conflicts arising from the unconscious. He believed that many neurotic symptoms play a compensatory role, acting as the psyche's attempt to restore inner balance when conscious attitudes become overly rigid, or when essential psychological needs are denied or neglected. Instead of labeling such symptoms as purely pathological, Jung interpreted them as vital messages from the unconscious, indicating that psychological change or realignment is necessary. This view redirected attention away from merely suppressing symptoms toward uncovering the deeper psychological significance and underlying purpose of troubling mental and emotional experiences. Jung differentiated neurosis and psychosis by examining how individuals relate to their unconscious material and their capacity to maintain functional ego boundaries. In cases of neurosis, the ego structure typically remains intact, though the person may suffer from inner conflict that manifests as anxiety, depression, compulsions, or other distressing symptoms. Neurotic individuals are generally in touch with external reality but find themselves torn between conscious goals and unconscious urges, or between conflicting psychological complexes. For Jung, neurosis signaled that the personality had lost its equilibrium and needed to reintegrate parts of the self that had been dismissed, denied, or left undeveloped. He saw this as essential for achieving psychological wholeness and more authentic self-expression. In contrast, psychosis represented a deeper rupture in the relationship between the ego and the unconscious, often resulting in an overwhelming intrusion of unconscious, particularly archetypal content, into conscious awareness. This influx tends to disrupt the ego's ability to function and interpret reality coherently. However, Jung did not regard psychotic phenomena as meaningless byproducts of brain dysfunction. Instead, he explored the psychological and symbolic meanings within seemingly irrational or bizarre experiences. He observed that psychotic episodes often contain profound archetypal and spiritual motifs, manifestations of the psyche's attempt to grapple with core questions of identity, meaning, and one's place in the cosmos. From this perspective, Certain mental breakdowns might be better understood as misguided or incomplete efforts at psychological transformation, rather than mere illness. Jung's concept of mental health centered on psychological integration, growth, and the capacity for inner transformation, rather than the simple absence of symptoms or conformity to social norms. He argued that genuine mental well-being involves maintaining a dynamic interplay between consciousness and the unconscious, allowing the personality to grow through the integration of new experiences over time. This requires access to and the expression of the full spectrum of psychological functions, thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition, as well as engagement with archetypal energies that infuse life with depth and meaning. He warned that becoming psychologically one-sided, even in socially sanctioned ways, can create fertile ground for inner fragmentation and symptom formation. Jung's therapeutic model emphasized facilitating the psyche's natural tendency towards self-regulation and healing, rather than enforcing external solutions or eradicating all discomfort. He believed that symptoms often contain within them the blueprint for their own resolution, and that effective therapy involves helping individuals engage with their symptoms, not resist them blindly. Such a process requires time, patience, and a fundamental respect for the intelligence embedded in psychological distress. What may initially appear as senseless or destructive often reveals a deeper constructive aim when approached with openness and discernment. Jung's vision offers hope for those facing mental health challenges by suggesting that these struggles often represent meaningful efforts by the psyche to evolve, and that, with careful support and understanding, they can become catalysts for healing, growth, and self-realization. Part 34. Projection, Transference, and Relationship Dynamics. Carl Jung's insights into projection illuminated one of the most essential ways the unconscious mind influences both conscious awareness and interpersonal relationships. Projection arises when a person unconsciously assigns their own inner traits, unresolved conflicts, or untapped potentials onto others, perceiving in them aspects of themselves they are unwilling or unable to acknowledge. This psychological process functions involuntarily and without conscious intent, leading individuals to see others not as they truly are, but as reflections of their own internal states. Jung recognized that projection serves a dual purpose. It acts as a defense mechanism, shielding the ego from painful self-realizations, while also presenting a path toward growth through eventual recognition and reclamation of these disowned parts. Projections become particularly compelling when the person onto whom they are cast shares some actual resemblance to the projected content. Jung referred to this as a hook, a real or perceived quality in the other that allows the projection to latch on. For instance, someone who suppresses aggressive impulses may find themselves disproportionately upset by even mild assertiveness in others. Likewise, a person who has rejected their creative potential may respond with jealousy or disdain toward artists or innovators. These reactions often feel completely reasonable to the person projecting, which makes it extremely challenging to differentiate projection from accurate perception. A useful indicator is the emotional intensity surrounding particular interactions or relationships. Feelings that are out of proportion to the actual circumstances often signal that projection may be at play. Transference is a specific and particularly powerful form of projection that tends to surface in therapeutic settings or other emotionally charged relationships involving trust, authority, or vulnerability. Jung noted that clients routinely project archetypal images onto their therapists, imagining them as parental figures, wise mentors, or even magical healers endowed with the power to bring transformation or redemption. These projections frequently mirror unresolved patterns from early childhood, reactivating old wounds and relational dynamics. Far from being an obstacle, Jung saw this as a therapeutic opportunity, an essential phase of the healing journey where clients can revisit and rework formative experiences within the safety of the therapeutic relationship. He cautioned against prematurely dismantling these projections through analysis alone, arguing instead that transference should be engaged with consciously as a natural and valuable part of the healing process. Equally important is countertransference, the term Jung used to describe the therapist's own emotional responses to the client. Though sometimes seen as a hindrance, Jung recognized countertransference as a vital source of information, revealing unconscious elements within both the therapist and the relationship itself. Rather than rejecting or suppressing these reactions, Jung advocated for conscious reflection and ethical self-awareness, enabling therapists to use their own responses as tools for deeper understanding. This perspective was groundbreaking, challenging the idea of therapists as detached experts and emphasizing instead the mutual psychological influence that exists in every healing relationship. Recognizing and reclaiming one's projections is among the most crucial aspects of psychological maturation and relational health. Doing so involves cultivating the ability to discern between one's own inner material and the authentic traits of others. It requires taking ownership of those neglected aspects of the self, rather than attempting to control or correct others who appear to embody them. Jung observed that this process often begins with disillusionment, an uncomfortable realization that people once idealized or vilified are not as they were imagined. This disillusionment, however, paves the way for the more demanding task of integrating the formerly projected qualities into one's conscious self. Through this difficult but rewarding work, relationships become more grounded and authentic. People are no longer viewed as symbols of internal conflicts, but appreciated for who they truly are. At the same time, the individual grows psychologically by embracing aspects of the self that had previously been hidden or denied. Part 35. Eastern Philosophy's Influence on Jung. Carl Jung's engagement with Eastern philosophical and spiritual traditions had a profound impact on his theories of consciousness, psychological growth, and the deeper purpose of human life. Beginning in the 1920s, Jung immersed himself in the study of Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, and other Eastern systems of thought. He was struck by the parallels between the transformative journeys described in these texts and his own clinical insights into the process of individuation and the pursuit of psychological wholeness. Unlike many of his Western contemporaries who viewed Eastern ideas as merely exotic or mystical, Jung approached them with deep respect, recognizing them as comprehensive psychological frameworks. He saw them not as distant curiosities, but as practical systems that offered meaningful guidance for exploring and engaging with the deeper aspects of the human psyche. These cross-cultural studies both affirmed his own psychological models and broadened his understanding of the vast potential within human consciousness. The Hindu concept of the self, as the foundational reality that underlies individual identity, provided Jung with a compelling analog to his own discovery of the self-archetype. He noted profound resemblances between the Hindu path to realizing the true self and the psychological journey he observed in his patients. Both emphasized moving beyond the limitations of the ego to connect with a deeper, more universal consciousness. However, Jung distinguished his approach from that of traditional Hinduism by focusing not on transcendence alone, but on the necessity of integrating unconscious material into conscious awareness. For Jung, psychological growth involved engaging with experience, not escaping it. Buddhism, too, deeply informed Jung's understanding of suffering and psychological healing. Its teachings on the roots of suffering, particularly the attachment to rigid beliefs about the self and the nature of reality, mirrored Jung's own observations about the causes of neurosis. He recognized that psychological distress often stems from an inflexible sense of identity and the repression of unconscious elements. The Buddhist practice of mindful, non-judgmental awareness influenced Jung's therapeutic method, encouraging a more open and attentive approach to internal experience. He was especially drawn to the middle way, a core Buddhist principle that avoids extremes and instead seeks balance. This philosophy resonated with Jung's emphasis on holding and integrating opposites rather than choosing one side over the other. Taoism offered Jung another rich source of insight, particularly in its view of psychological energy and natural flow. The principle of Wu Wei, or effortless action aligned with the rhythms of nature, echoed Jung's belief in allowing psychological processes to unfold organically rather than trying to impose control. The Taoist symbol of yin and yang, representing the dynamic interplay of complementary forces, greatly influenced Jung's conception of transformation as the integration of opposites rather than the dominance of one over another. He found the Taoist respect for timing and natural cycles particularly relevant to psychotherapy, especially in terms of recognizing the right moments for intervention and change. Jung also admired the Taoist image of the sage, one who lives in harmony with the natural world, not as an ideal of control or perfection, but as a model of wisdom, fluidity, and attunement to the deeper currents of life. This perspective provided a powerful vision of psychological maturity rooted in balance, presence, and responsiveness. Despite his deep admiration for Eastern thought, Jung cautioned that Western individuals should not adopt these spiritual systems wholesale without considering their own cultural and psychological backgrounds. He warned against what he termed psychic inflation, the danger of identifying too quickly with Eastern spiritual ideals without undergoing the necessary groundwork of psychological integration. Such identification, he argued, could offer only superficial comfort while leaving core personal conflicts unresolved. For Jung, true psychological transformation required a grounded and honest engagement with one's own inner landscape, including the darker, hidden aspects of the psyche. Escaping into borrowed spiritual practices, however alluring, would not replace the hard work of facing one's shadow and confronting the conditioning of one's own culture. By weaving together the wisdom of Eastern traditions with the rigor of Western psychological science, Jung developed a distinctive and integrative path toward inner development. His approach honored both empirical understanding and contemplative insight, remaining rooted in therapeutic practice and personal experience, while opening the door to expanded states of consciousness and deeper self-realization.